Councilmember Seaman.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper.
Present.
Councilmember Victoria.
Here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Councilmember Clay will not be joining us this evening. Are there any council comments? Councilmember Wright.
My only council comment is that I'm trying to transition from, I know some of my other colleagues may have done this already, from paper documents associated with our meetings to the computer, so I don't get the printouts every week. So if I'm going to have my computer up here on the dais and be looking at documents, so don't think I'm not paying attention to you. I just happen to be looking at the PDF documents on the computer as opposed to on paper. So I just wanted to make people aware of that.
And you've got your glasses handy.
I've got my glasses handy.
Councilmember Robinson.
And I still like shuffling around with paper here. I'll try to wean myself from it, but I'm not quite ready to go that route. I also wanted to say that I appreciated having the opportunity to go to the Council of Governments, let's see if I can get this right, Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee meeting, the first one last week. And I was encouraged by the dedication and the sense of purpose and the way the meetings are being run, although they're only once every 2 months, so that will be a real challenge to get to push things along. I mentioned the city of Babylon, New York, and I hoped that committee, that the COG committee, will be able to deliver policies or suggestions for policies that we can bring back here, something along the lines of what took place in Babylon, New York, where they decided that energy waste, and they defined energy waste as the energy you could save in your home if you would tighten it up. They defined that as solid waste, and because they defined it as policy move as solid waste, they can work to reduce that stream of waste, and they can also move to, in their attempts to reduce it, or in their efforts to reduce it, they can attach debt to people's homes if the people want, of course, and it stays with the home as opposed to staying with a mortgage. And that's a little bit of an arcane way to approach things, but I think it's very powerful. And in fact, it's inspired Council Member Berliner from our county council in Montgomery County to push for a way to get people to take out small loans, make their homes more energy efficient, and in the same way, attach that loan, the repayment of that loan, to their home, so that the next owner owns the reduction in energy in that home. This is the kind of policy thing I'm hopeful will come from that, and the kind of thing that we can look at here. So that's what I wanted to say about that.
Other council comments? I just wanted to mention that Councilmember Victoria and I had the chance to testify at the Montgomery County Planning Board Tacoma-Langley Sector Plan public hearing on last Thursday evening, and then after we testified, we went up and sat with the Planning Board, and the chair of the Planning Board, Royce Hanson, made it clear that he wants the city to be involved hand in glove with the Planning Board as they consider the sector plan, so that there will be other opportunities for us to participate and to share in what's going on and how they deal with the sector plan. And there are going to be 2 work sessions on that in September. I want to say the 10th and the 24th, but I'm not sure. I think that's right. I think those are the Thursdays. So that should be moving along. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that I got a copy. I don't know if everybody else got a copy. I tend to doubt it since it's kind of thick. The current Montgomery County Public Schools Facilities Master Plan. So if any of my colleagues or anybody is interested in looking at this, I've got it. So it's here. Do it.
Oh, I thought you were going to say.
No? Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. Mayor, I thought you were going to do the announcement because we talked about it earlier, but I just want to remind folks that on August 4th from 6 to 8:30, we'll have the, what's it called? The Crossroads Night Out at Tacoma-Langley. And I encourage everyone to do it. It'll be adjacent to the McDonald's. in the Langley Park Shopping Center on August 4th. It's a really interesting night. You can find out all kinds of, you can go up to the police and ask them anything you want. You can go up to the firefighters and do the same thing, and they have a lot of entertainment. There'll be food there and stuff like that.
And there's always a good crowd.
And there's always a good crowd, yes.
Councilmember Stevens.
And there is a great crowd, as there will be on August 4th at the 777 Maple Avenue, the National Night Out along Maple Avenue in our neighborhood. We're going to have a great time this year. The police are going to be there talking with community members, ask your questions, we'll let the officers know how much we support them and the work they do and how much we appreciate it. Also an opportunity for neighbors to meet each other, get to know each other, have refreshments, hamburgers, hot dogs, watch the kids in the moon bounce, and all the other activities we have for this year. So look forward to seeing everyone. It's going to run from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock this year, because during the last hour we're going to have a movie here on Maple Avenue. So if you go to the one in Langley Park, you might want to swing by Maple Avenue to see the movie. Thank you.
Any other council comments? There are no additional agenda items other than I note that on the consent agenda, item 2B, the resolution establishing a task force on environmental sustainability will be pulled from the consent agenda, and we will take that item up after the consent agenda. And the only scheduling update is to remind folks that this is our last meeting of the, I guess, kind of the summer, and we'll be going on our August break after this evening, and we will be back in session on September 8th, the day after Labor Day, and that's a Tuesday. The clerk sent out minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look at those? Should we adopt minutes or not?
I'm ready to move them if you'd like.
Okay, if you'd like to. And those are the minutes, if you can tell me the dates.
Yes, I probably can. Aren't they on the?
No?
Oh,
No?
No. I remember May 7th because I had a change that I sent to the city clerk on that one. And May 14th was in there.
There were 4 sets, I believe.
There was a set before that,
5?
which was probably the Monday before.
Maybe the deputy clerk can tell us the dates.
It was the 7th, 14th, 18th, and then
I think there was an
the
April
one
one.
that comes before the 7th, May
Right.
7th, whichever that was.
April 30.
So that was those 4.
Okay. So you're moving those 4?
That's correct.
And was there a second?
Second.
So,
We had 2
oh,
seconds now.
all right, I didn't remember. So moved by Councilmember Sniffer, seconded by Councilmember Wright. All those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Now's the time for public comment, for anybody who would like to make any comments on anything not on our regular meeting agenda. So if you have comments on the regular meeting agenda, if you can please hold your comments until we talk about those items, and otherwise talk about anything else, please identify yourself, and please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Welcome.
Yep, hello, my name's Pat Loveless, Tacoma Parks Peace Delegate. I want to say, hopefully you guys have a good vacation coming up. But also, I was sick, I couldn't make it in last week, but I watched it on Channel 13, and I saw you guys picked up my idea about inviting President Obama to our folk festivals and stuff. Because I remember I suggested that a few months ago. And I would like to also see if we can do that, and also see if we can get the kids involved in that too. Maybe we can get them to pledge nonviolence and not to join gangs and stuff. And maybe if we can get President Obama to come out to Tacoma Park, he'll see what kind of an activist community we really have. And also, he hasn't been up to Maryland at all. And I think it'd be great to do this because, and then we can have him address the children and stuff and give the kids something to look forward to other than joining the street gang and being a big shot. You know, because that's not really the way to be a big shot. You want to be a big shot, you got to work to make the world a better place. And also, when we have these different events and stuff like the night out, the folk festival, the street festival, whenever we advertise this, can we please, again, stress that the parents and the guardians keep an eye on their underage children, because as you've been watching the news lately, disappearances are skyrocketing. And I think if we all pull together and watch these kids and make sure their parents take care of them, you know, I think we can prevent a lot of this. And maybe it might be even possible for Tacoma Park to pass a law requiring them to keep an eye on their kids. Because there's been a couple of times when they just leave the kids in the middle of the crowd and say, wait right here, I got to go out to the car and get something. They'll be gone for 45 minutes to an hour. And it only takes less than 3 seconds for a kid to be snatched. Because that happened out in Wisconsin, out in Michigan. The kid was found, they were playing outside alone. The parents left them, and a second later she was gone. And 11 days later, they found her wrapped in cement, dead. So we can do everything we can to prevent it before it happens. You know, we can't say just because it never happened here that it never will, because that's when the problems start. And if we can really put that on all the flyers to have the parents watch those kids, because I'd hate to see something like that happen. I don't know if my health could handle that. But, and we can prevent it. And also I want you to know that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemorations are coming up on August 5th and August 9th down at the White House and down at the reflecting pool areas. We do this every year to remember the people we have lost to the atomic bomb and to pledge never to allow another one to happen again. As we all know, you know, the situation in the Middle East is not doing too good, and you know, war is escalating, violence is escalating. We're going to do what we can to stop it. And I think the first night out, if we can get a pledge to nonviolence to the kids, you know, get them to pledge to resist the gang and resist peer pressure, and make those kids a stronger people for Tacoma Park, because they're going to be our leaders. So anyway, thank you very much. Maybe we can get President Obama to come out here, because if he's an activist, this is his community also. Let's see if we can get him out to Tacoma Park. Come on, President Obama, if you're listening, come on out and join us. Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name's Larry Silverman. I reside at 7308 Birch Avenue. I am also I own a shop here at Tacoma Park, S&A Beads, and it's about that I want to speak to you quickly tonight. Our shop, and I'm only speaking for myself, but I think other shops are having hard times with the hard times of the country, and we're thinking a lot about what we can do to keep our business section vibrant, and because it seems to be such a wonderful part of the city, and I'm very proud to be participating in it. Two things come to mind which I wanted to share with you, both of which you have some control over. One is the tax rate, and the other is energy infrastructure. On the tax issue, most people don't realize it, but there is a personal property tax here in Tacoma Park and in Montgomery County on commercial property in shops. Now, Montgomery County has a tax of 1.707, that's $1.70 something, per $100 of equipment. And that's not a very onerous tax, because the equipment in stores it's costly, but it depreciates quickly, and you get the benefit of that depreciation. And the average store, like ours in Silver Spring, pays a couple $100 on that tax. But Tacoma Park also has a tax of 1.45% on the equipment, which I don't complain about. But it also has a tax on the inventory of the shop. They say how much stuff we have in the shop. And I don't know what everybody has, but I think in the shops in Tacoma Park, the inventory is between 50 and 100,000, maybe more, I don't know. But it's a significant amount, and of course it's what our customers want. They want us to maintain that inventory. And when the city imposes a tax of $1.45, it gets to be real money, and it's quite onerous. And I think if the times weren't so hard, I wouldn't be talking about this. Now, let me say, it's totally within your province to adjust this tax up or down, or to exempt inventory the way the rest of my the towns in Montgomery County also have an inventory tax. Gaithersburg exempts people 100%, Rockville 82% from the inventory part of it. So I think they're comparable. So I would hope what you have to do is pass a resolution, then convey it to the, Department of Assessment and Taxation by May 1st. So that's the time you have to act, and then it'll take effect the next year. You don't need the legislature. It's entirely within your province. The second issue I want to talk about is energy infrastructure. I think the flat roof shops of the Old Town section and perhaps other parts of town are really ideal sites for solar energy and other innovative alternative energy systems based on renewable sources. And if I may, just a second, the stimulus bill and the various energy bills have quite a lot of incentives to put solar panels and do other things of that sort on the roofs of those commercial buildings. And I think the post office, as a federal building, is almost obliged to accept any offer they might get from their landlord along that line. I think their business people in town are interested in it, but you know, it's a very complex business. And I think the city ought to be involved, particularly in dealing with the post office, and the city ought to take some leadership, talk with the landowners and the merchants, and see if we can initiate a thing like that. I think that would be very good for the business. It would be good for the world, and good for the climate, and good for Tacoma Park, but very good for the business district, because people would read about it all over the county, and Prince George's, the whole region would see it, and people would come to us, I think. So I've been talking with my landlord and talking with other store owners, but I think it's very important that the city itself get involved, and I'd be happy to talk to you when there's more time about how you might do that. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. I hope you will support the local business.
Thank you for bringing both of those to our attention. I wasn't aware that we could exempt inventory.
It'd be helpful to know from the city manager at some point what that, if we made that change, what it would cost the city.
Good evening. I'm Ron Wiley from Community Services, and it's always good to see all of you. Reuben, particularly nice to see you back, and I want to say welcome to the newest member of the council. We're glad you're here. I just wanted to update you on 3 quick things. First, the pool. We submitted our final communication, and we had projected that we would return $40,000 unused back to the county. I'm happy to report that the figure is actually 40,000 and some change. I think it's just under 40,500. We're pleased with the support that we've gotten and revenue that we've produced, which we can carry over. They're now just about finished with painting the ceiling and the walls. They drained the pool, and I think probably by the end of the week we'll start refilling it. Let me just say the papers are all signed for next year's full school year contract. We're pleased about that. We've taken on some additional responsibility to make that possible, and I think we're going to be able to make a good showing. There were some, as each of you know, some very frustrating times. The thing that I'm most pleased is there were no accidents or incidents at all in that 4.5 months. But we did move to have 3 employees replaced, and we think that as we move forward, having learned what we've learned, I'm very hopeful that you won't see repeats of some of the situations that we had. All in all, I think it's been pretty good. We're looking at the cost benefit of opening the pool prior to the start of school in August. Students return on the 24th, so we'll definitely be open by then, and we'll give that appropriate publicity. Thank you again for your support last year, and what you promised this year, and you're a real stakeholder, and we appreciate that. The other thing is just for a couple of you that may be more primarily interested, I think we're making real progress on the Sycamore Avenue house. That has been a perplexing situation here for far too long, and I'll just leave it at that. And the other thing is I want to thank you for the money that you send over that we've been able to use. We helped one client who was in the foreign ministry of El Salvador, and when I found that out, I got him to help us go to the embassy. We had a very good meeting, and I went there because I think that the embassy should partner with groups like us to take care of many of their citizens. You know, we have the second largest El Salvadorian community in the United States. In fact, I understand in the world. We got a very positive response, and I'm to make some specific proposals by the end of August. So I just wanted to let you know we're working diligently on that challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all those updates. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move along to the next item on our agenda, which is the city manager's comments.
I'd just like to note for the record that included in the council's agenda packet is a report from the Emergency Preparedness Committee. This report covers the period from October 2008 to June 2009. There is not an opportunity really tonight for a presentation, but I think if the council had any quick questions, I see that Wolfgang Bergner, the co-chair of the committee, who I believe was the author of the report, is in the audience tonight if the council had any quick questions about what was submitted. The other item I had this evening is to have the chief come forward and to brief the council. We've had an upsurge in crime over the last 30 days, and I asked if Chief Rakucci could be here this evening to share some information about that with the council and with the community and to provide some information about what the department is doing to combat that.
Good evening. In the last 30 days, we've suffered it, as I call it, suffered. We've had a rather dramatic increase after the first 6 months, which were absolutely great. I think the summer has brought a lot of that on. But there's been some things we've seen that I want to point out to the community tonight, and I hope that if you get any inquiries from your constituents that you would pass these on also. The recent burglaries, which is a big concern, they've been coming in through the rear. Most of the entry has been made by breaking out a basement window or a window in the rear of the residence. And in monitoring some of the listserv discussions on burglaries and what's been happening in the neighborhoods, I've seen where several residents observe people cutting through the yards or walking through the yards. And of course, they did not call. And there's a debate on when you should call. And I know right now a lot of people are a little paranoid because of what's been going on in our society with profiling. What we're asking people to do is, it's not usual behavior for someone to cut through your backyard, especially here in Tacoma Park. If they see people in their backyard, please call us. Let us check it out. And it's much easier to check it out than second guess yourself later, as a lot of our residents are doing now when something has happened to another neighbor's house. The other thing we're noticing, open garages, we're getting hit pretty hard with thefts from there. If you're not home, or even when you're home, keep your garage door down unless there's a good reason to have it up. The second thing is sheds. We're finding a lot of sheds being left open during the summer. You're cutting grass and you don't put the lock back on. We're having a large increase in that. To let the public know, we've increased our plainclothes officers. We have our bike patrols and uniformed presence out in the neighborhoods. We're doing a lot of work crime analysis-wise. We're having an emergency meeting, my entire supervisory staff tomorrow, to go over some things we think we need to do to improve some of the patrol techniques and CID follow-up. So we're doing quite a bit. We have closed a couple burglaries and have recovered some property, but the crime seems to be increasing. Now, obviously, it's been an increase. Over the weekend, we had no burglaries, but we had 4 thefts from a car. We had a burglary at about 3 o'clock today that I just got reported to me about a half hour ago, which fits the same, came in through the rear. So we would ask, if you see anything suspicious in the rear of your residence, we're working not just Monday through Friday, we're doing it 7 days a week. Yesterday, we did identify some people that were in our city. It was obvious what they were up to. We had some conversation with them. Nothing happened, but we may have prevented them and given them the idea that we are watching and we are out there, and we're going to continue to do that. But our eyes and our ears are our residents. Please do not hesitate to call 301-270-1100. Our staff is aware we're going to get a lot of calls, and some of them might sound silly and goofy. Our staff wants every call we can get, because it's going to be that one call where I didn't really want to call. It's going to lead to an arrest. But we need our citizens' help. It's reduced crime for the first 6 months of the year. Obviously, it's increased now. A lot of people are out of town, and that hurts us also. So we want everyone to work together. And we will continue to update you and give you information as we get more. And I also would like to express an invitation to all our citizens to come out to our 2 national locations. We look for it. They're bigger and better this year than they were last year, and we look to have even bigger and better crowds. Thank you.
And most of the burglaries are happening during the day, it seems? Is that
Yeah,
right?
they're definitely daytime burglars.
And it's both burglaries and thefts from autos that are increased, like other crime, like we haven't seen an increase in violent crimes.
Yeah,
right?
the good thing is, and I'm afraid to say it, but the robberies still are down. We haven't had a problem with that. It's definitely burglaries and thefts from cars. Quick things that they can pawn or sell on the street. And what we're learning right now, when I was talking with our Lieutenant CID tonight, they're not taking stuff to pawn shops. We think a lot of stuff's being sold on the street, which puts us at a disadvantage to try to track some of the stuff. We took 3 carloads out of D.C. on one of our burglars last week. We've identified another burglary in the city, but we got 3 carloads of stolen property that we've yet to been able to trace. So we're still working on it. We'll eventually trace some of it, but right now the burglars are getting smarter, but we're going to get just a little bit smarter than them when we get them off the street.
Well, I want to thank you for your work and apologize for any of the citizens from my ward that have been maybe overzealous in their attempts to contribute and help you. Maybe with some better direction, they may be able to keep their eyes open and call the police right away when they see things, as opposed to try and patrol themselves.
Well, I think the biggest thing is, when in doubt, call. No call's not serious to us. They're all important to us, and we keep emphasizing that. And our staff knows how important it is. People that are taking the calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you. Any questions for the city manager on any of that? Okay, thank you. We'll now move to our first agenda item on the regular meeting schedule, which is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for renovation of the auditorium. And the Deputy City Manager is going to walk us through a few of the details.
Good evening. First, I'd like to go through this, the actual award discussion, and then I'll go back and brief the council, reminder a little bit about what the project entails and some of the green elements of the project. In November of 2008, we awarded a contract to iStudio Architects to take an original concept design for making this room here into a multi-use auditorium and preparing revised plans and detailed designs. Those designs went out to bid in early June. Bids were received on July 10th. We received 9 bids for the project. We were very pleased with the bidders and with the bid amounts. The bid package called for a base bid, which was essentially redoing this room, and then 2 add alternates. One alternate was for photovoltaic installation array on the roof to help offset some energy costs, and the second was to look at doing some redesign of the lobby, because one of the aspects of this project is that in order to get the ramp to allow handicap accessibility to the stage, there's encroachment into the lobby, and that impacts how the lobby works. And we've also, as staff, kind of determined that the desk that we have as a reception desk isn't as functional as we would like. So we were asking for some redesign of that and to make it more functional, especially with the changes. The bids that came in ranged on the base bids from about $714,000 to $1,200,000, and the total amounts, if you added in alternate 1 and alternate 2, ranged from $813,000 to about $1.4 million. And in the packet is the list of the 4 bidders and the amounts that they bid for each of those items. The 9 bids were reviewed by an initial selection team. It included the project architect, Rick Schneider from my studio, our city's construction consultant, Cheryl Ann DePietro of Sharon Consulting, and myself. We ranked the 9 bids. 3 bids seemed particularly responsive, and they happened to be the 3 lowest bids of the 9. We called those firms in and interviewed them. As part of the selection panel, also Public Works Director Daryl Braithwaite participated because one major element is HVAC and other elements of the facility, as well as Vanita George of my staff, who's had a lot of experience with construction. Our team was unanimous in supporting, in assessing that Marion Construction had the best bid and the best presentation at the interview. We felt that they had studied the project very well, had a good approach to how this project would move forward, and they have quite a good history with compliance with LEED certification. And in fact, the principals of the firm were with a regular construction firm for about 20 years. It's a well-known big firm in the area. And then they broke off to do more green development, and that's been their specialty for the last 5 years. They have a number of projects that include auditoriums that are very comparable to the size and nature of this project. We went through the reference checks. Findings were positive. As going through the bids, one of the things that we were looking at was what we wanted to put forward for you to consider. We would, as staff, one of the things that happened was the proposal for work on the lobby was prepared at a fairly kind of more of a concept stage than a detailed stage. And as we wanted to get this out to bid as quickly as possible for the major portions of this project, we did want to have an element to deal with the lobby. But there have been a lot of discussions among staff about exactly what makes the best sense for something to put forth on the lobby. Given that we're not to the complete detailed level, we prefer and we recommend that you don't approve going forward with alternate number 2 as part of this package this evening, but that we would come back to you with information on doing a change order for a lobby project at a later date when we have more detail and we have kind of agreement about how that should move forward. We do recommend that you go forward with the base bid with Marion Construction and with the bid for the photovoltaic array on the roof of the building, and those are fully detailed and ready to go. So I just wanted to go through that recommendation. In terms of what this project involves, the project is almost the same as what you've seen before as part of the concept. Basically, it takes this room, and as you can tell, the room is not lovely, has some issues. We do the best we can. But there's several things that would be changed. One is that the stage lowers a little bit and expands a little bit. One change between what the concept plan had and what is in these designs is that there actually would be a floating wood floor as opposed to a fixed wood floor. The spring thing that goes with the floor helps in 2 things. One is it's always preferred by dancers to have the sprung floor. Nevertheless, the major reason that we wanted to go with that option was that it really reduces the level of sound in the police department below us. And we've had several incidents of really good performances here that were really too loud for the police department. Very little change in terms of price, but it was the right thing, I think, to do for the flooring. The dais gets broken up. A composite group of desks is what the council would use for council meetings. That gets separated into about 5 sections. Behind you would be doors that opened up, the desk pieces would roll out after council meetings with an open stage for the rest of the week, so that as various performances, recreation programs, whatever take place during the week, they've got a good place to do that. Other important components of this project are an overhaul of the HVAC system. So when you walk in here, you don't have the moldy smell and you don't have the noise. And these are things that just seem very basic for this proposal. The HVAC elements will be on the roof. One option was to put them here, but we found a much more efficient system by having it on the roof, and so that's the plan that's included in the design. The acoustics are something that are important to this project. Rather than have the ceiling that just goes back like that, the ceiling will actually be there'll be what they call clouds, but there's sections, acoustic panels, that work their way backwards down to the rear of the auditorium so that the sound works very well. And then circling the semicircle will be acoustic screens that will be imprinted with scenes of Tacoma Park, historic Tacoma Park. And they're really quite nice and show a variety of places around Tacoma Park and a variety of people. One of the other aspects of this proposal is that there will actually be a rear door or a front door, whichever, close to the front of this building. Also with double doors. There'll be double doors here and double doors there to cut down on sound and light when we have something like a film fest in here. But it does allow for several different ways of getting in and out of the space without having to walk in front of a performance. New chairs, new carpeting. One of the things that I'm particularly pleased about is the list of finishes are really quite remarkable in terms of their green characteristics. In your package, near the back of the package, are the list of, for the carpeting, the percentage of its recycled materials and it's recyclable. There will be, it looks like a vinyl wall covering for areas that don't have these acoustic screens. It's to the durability of a commercial grade wall covering, vinyl wall covering, but it's actually made of grass and newspapers. It's completely biodegradable over time, and it's actually quite attractive as well. The theater lighting will be LED lights, which, although they're more expensive over the long haul, certainly are much more energy efficient. And the chairs have huge amounts of kind of recycled parts or recyclable parts. Everything about the project has been thought through in terms of what do we do with what we dispose of out of here, and how do we do that? How do we purchase things so it's from very close by locations whenever possible to minimize transportation costs and the pollution that comes from that. What this adds up to is the ability to be LEED certified for this project. It's not silver, although we're working at it. Because there's not a good category for auditoriums in a government building for LEED certification, we have to go with a commercial interior level, and they just don't have as many categories of things for us to get points at as we might otherwise. Another aspect of the project is that from the lobby there will be an entrance on a ramp so that a person in a wheelchair can actually have access to the stage. We've not had that. It's not been ADA accessible. And there will also be an ADA accessible bathroom there, a little kitchenette for things where we need to have water or whatever, and the storage then for the dais and the portions that go back there. I have plans or things if people need to see them, but I think that it's very much the same as what had been talked about in terms of concept. It has, however, been fascinating to watch the detail that's needed to meet the LEED criteria and what the research has been to get the various components. I think it'll be an exciting project to have here, and then to have a green roof right outside and the photovoltaics on the roof. I think altogether makes a very nice project. But if there's certain questions.
If you can say just a little bit more about the photovoltaic array on the roof in terms of the scope of what that does.
You know, I'm not sure that I can speak too much to it. It's a 8 to 10 kilowatt photovoltaic array. It has an opportunity to offset the energy use of this room. How much extra it does, I don't know.
Right, but it's essentially, it deals with the needs of this space.
That's correct.
Councilmember Wright?
Does it leave space for additional, like, does it take up the whole roof, or could we do additional photovoltaics in the future, do you know?
It does not take up the whole roof. There would be opportunities for that, for an expansion. There's also, you know, a variety of other kinds of energy efficient things in other ways that, you know, might complement it.
Well, I don't know if other people have questions about the design stuff. I thank you for refreshing our memory of that very thorough
I've looked at it for so long, I kind of forgot
the different
that,
aspects. I couldn't remember, did we have the other door? Was it double doors?
It is double
the
door.
various things were helpful.
Right. We wanted to, we really did have a lot of discussion about how would the space function. And one of the things about, if you don't have a double door, then you'd have, you know, light and whatever when you don't want it coming in and out. So we've minimized that impact.
Could you talk a little bit more about are the microphones on the dais wired, or will the system be wireless, or how does that work?
There are wires. Basically, the various components of the desk fasten together. They link together so that there's some wired systems. Some things won't be wired systems, but especially for the monitors, you'll have video monitors. I think there's 5 video monitors that will be spaced, so there's a little bit of sharing. All of those things are interconnected with actual kind of plug-in components. And
6
then,
monitors.
I'm sorry?
6.
Okay. The other thing is that there'll be fairly large screens on either side of the stage, and also a big screen that can come down much bigger than the one we have now for different kinds of displays. One of the things we're particularly glad about is that, you know, you guys won't have to run out here to the chairs to see a PowerPoint presentation, and also other people can follow along as presentations are made. There's a lectern that has lots of interesting facility for different kinds of presentations and can be moved around in different ways, and is also handicap accessible in different ways so that it functions for a variety of people.
Maybe if you can just say a little bit more about with Councilmember Wright's question about the microphones, the fact that the audio-video aspects of this are a different project, a different budget.
Right. One of the things, we have about $1.39 million for this project. And the project will take almost all of that. As far as we can tell, we're waiting to see some of the details on the numbers. However, an additional component does come from our cable television fund. And so about $300,000 of this project, in addition to the $1.39 million, has to do with the cameras, the audiovisual capabilities, really quite nice system so that as different groups come in, it's easy to plug in and do what they want to do. And it goes more directly to the AV system and the cable television system. And that is, it's being worked very carefully together, but it's 2 different funds. And I see a question here. I see emergency power. We're trying to make sure that this works in a variety of different situations. I'll have to find out a little bit more about that. I do want to say, though, that one of the advantages that we do have with this project is that by removing the HVAC equipment out of the room back here, we actually end up with a place for some of our emergency supplies that we've been looking for. So as part of our emergency operations plan, this room ends up becoming more and more important.
And as long as you're going over that, we'll get down here in a second. Can you just say a word or two about any of the other potential little pieces that might add? And I was thinking about, in looking over this way, the possibility of doing a ramp at
Well,
that
we're
floor?
looking at several different things. Obviously, we're trying to be very careful about money, but one of the things that, first of all, during construction, one of the important components of LEED elements is to minimize dust and other air pollution during construction. And so the idea is that this room would be very much walled off during construction, and the door that's over here would be the primary entrance and exit for the contractors. It's very useful. Right now, there's 2 steps down. It may be very useful to make that a smooth grade, and then also function as a smooth way to get equipment in and out of the building, or for ADA exits during emergencies and that kind of.
Councilmember Snipper.
Quick question. The general concern is that the project be finished on time. So can you talk a little bit about provisions that we will put in place to ensure that it is finished on time?
Sure. The first thing is the contractor is required to get the project done within 180 days of getting the contract. In our interviews with the contractors, they felt that that was very sufficient time, and that in fact it should be less than that. There may be some lead time for some of the big components, so they may not even start until October in terms of actual mobilization on site. They may be ordering supplies and doing some other components of the project earlier, but the actual time of construction is supposed to be relatively short. However, we are going to monitor on a daily basis. Ms. George will be our person on site to monitor with the contracting team. We were very impressed by the on-site supervisor that we met with for Marion Construction as part of the interviews about how they do their scheduling and how they work with that. And I think we will be vigilant. We certainly will report if there's any surprises. But from what we've learned so far, it looks like a doable project within the time frame.
Councilmember Victoria.
Just to clarify, since I'm rather new to this discussion, you said that you think the overall budget is 1.39, and we're looking at 813. What else is included in that 1.39 if the AV is a separate budget?
Well, actually, I think it's about the 5th piece of paper back from the end of this package. There's about $190,000 worth of design and oversight costs from the architect. There's the base bid amount of about $714,000. There's the photovoltaic array for about $72,000. Then there's construction contingencies. There's some certain components that we would purchase outright. The dais pieces and the lectern are things that are being custom ordered and we simply would buy. Okay. So in any event, we come up to, at this point, without having opened any walls and finding any surprises, about $1.2 million in terms of what we estimate the costs are going to be. As we were very happy we're in a bidding environment where the prices came in lower than we originally anticipated. Nevertheless, we'll be watching them very closely.
Okay. And for this alternate 2, which you are not recommending we act on tonight, to do the lobby,
right? When
do you expect to be forwarding a change order on that?
Well, I'm not sure. My guess is that we would be finalizing within about 3 or 4 weeks a detailed design.
So when council's back in September, more than likely there'll be something to look at there.
That's my understanding. We certainly would want to try to move it as quickly as possible, but we would be sharing information as soon as we can get to that to you. There's probably going to there probably are some decisions that you would like to have some input on that, but we're not to the point yet. We're still trying to wait to see how do we make the lobby both kid-friendly, adult-friendly, a good place, as you're going into an auditorium versus a place you come for passports versus a place that you, get information on a daily basis, and trying to make all of that work together with the design. So we're waiting to see what that looks like a little bit. So I think it's going to take a couple weeks.
Well, I bear the scars of a 13-year-old kitchen renovation and a very extensive home renovation 2 years ago. And when I hear the word change order, I just realize that we'll have very little ability to negotiate price once we've settled on a construction company. I know that you have very favorable review of this company, but
We're very,
it's a big piece to leave out. that
we're
really
very
escalate
sensitive
costs.
about it. What we didn't want was what I feared, which is that we end up with multiple change orders tweaking something that's in the alternate number
Absolutely.
2, that we'd rather just think it through and be careful and then go in with just one change.
Councilmember
you.
Siemens.
Thank you. And my questions kind of follow up on Councilmember Victoria's. I think the specific question that many of the community members have is, are we going to get this done for the amount of money that we have? And not have to, through change orders or just mismanagement, increase the amount of money that we're spending and have to increase taxes or affect our tax rate by it. So I have a couple questions. One is the contingency. How did we decide that a 5% contingency was sufficient?
Well, there's, for that, I asked around with the architects and others. This is actually a relatively simple project in the scheme of projects. And we have, so the recommendation was 5%. If you'll notice in the list, I've listed, I've got about $85,000 set aside for a lobby allowance and furniture related to that. I don't think it'll be that high, but I'm trying to give some, some upper-ended costs. And there's probably, another $150,000 that's not already allocated here. Nevertheless, that was the judgment of 5%, given the level of detail and review that the plans have gone through, that it would be appropriate.
Okay. And you touched on my second question, which is the lobby allowance. Does that have anything to do with option or alternative 2?
Yes.
Okay, so that's money that's being set aside to be available for that alternative when and if we had that finalized.
That's right.
Okay, and if through some unforeseen event we're unable to move forward with alternative 2, will the auditorium be usable?
Oh, yes.
Without doing the lobby at this time?
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing has to happen to the lobby. It will be tight walking if you're entering from the Grant Avenue entrance past the elevator. Going past the reception desk will be relatively narrow. It's doable. Still meets standards. It's handicap accessible. You can get a wheelchair through. It'll feel uncomfortable, but it's certainly possible.
And that's essentially because the ramp to access the stage,
Comes out that
dais,
far.
whatever we're calling, goes out into that space, and the corner of the ramp and the corner of the current desk are the pinch point.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then finally, I think it would be helpful for the community members who don't have the materials in front of them, if you could just very quickly run through the revenue sources.
Sure.
And let people know what the effect of this project is on their tax rate.
Okay. We're pleased that this project is paid for out of other tax funds as opposed to City of Tacoma Park tax funds. We're receiving $442,500 from Maryland Program Open Space. We've received quite a few amount of funds for this community center, and this is a continuation of that. We're receiving $247,500 through a federal designation through Chris Van Hollen's office for the HVAC system. And another $190,000 that we just received from Congressman Van Hollen's office for this project in general. We have $360,000 in Maryland bond bill financing, which is an allocation from the state legislature, and $150,000 has been promised to us from Washington Adventist Hospital. Altogether, that comes up with the total of the $1.39 million. There's no other designated city funds as part of the project.
And I know some people find those bond bills to be confusing. Do we have to repay that money to the state?
No, we do not.
Thank you.
And if you can just do the final piece of that, which is the audio-video revenue source.
Right. As I mentioned before, our special revenue fund for the cable television, which comes from funds from the various cable televisions that use
The-
space in Tacoma Park.
Like the franchise fees.
The franchise fee. We have adequate money in those accounts. We have more than adequate money for the $300,000 that's expected for that component.
Because I believe that we have kind of cable operating fees that come in and also equipment fees. It's divided up into two pieces, am I correct?
Yes, but Lonnie can give the breakdown if we need that. But
I wasn't necessarily looking for a breakdown,
Yeah.
but it's basically dedicated sources of funding.
These are dedicated,
that-
so we can't
that
use
if we
these for-
didn't use them on this, we wouldn't be able to use them somewhere else.
That's right. This is for those funds. We're very careful both with those funds and with for example, the federal funds for the HVAC system, that they're allocated very carefully so that those components only pay for those parts.
Right, so that in the end, all of the sources of revenue for this project are from dedicated sources for dedicated purposes, and they're not in any way kind of general
General
fund
revenue, no.
monies. They don't affect the tax rate.
They don't affect the city of Tacoma Park tax rate.
Other questions? Councilmember Wright.
Thanks for clarifying all those money questions. I had many of the same questions, so I won't re-ask them. One question I did have had to do with whether any local contractors from the city of Tacoma Park made bids for this project.
I don't believe so, although certainly Landis Construction, which is close by in Tacoma, DC, was one of the bidders. But we were particularly looking at, capacity to do the job and the cost of the project.
And I noticed the construction company is from the state of Virginia as opposed to the state of Maryland.
That's right. They're from Arlington.
Give any consideration
They have
to-
lots of very good friends in Tacoma Park, and they're very excited to be able to work in Tacoma.
No, I understand that, but I'm curious if we gave any preference at all to Maryland contractors.
We did not, although I certainly looked at that personally when I was reviewing the information.
And this project would fall under the living wage. The
That's correct.
contractors have to abide by our living wage ordinance.
That was part
I just
of their
wanted to check to
submission.
make sure that we're certain that they're aware of that ordinance and.
Yes, they actually had to sign their commitment to complying with the living wage as part of their bid package.
Great. To follow up on some of the question that Councilmember Snipper asked about timely completion of the project.
Yeah.
I'm curious, it's great that they said they would have the project done in 180 days, but usually the thing that dictates that is how steep the penalties are for not having the project completed. So I'm curious as to what the contract says about.
We've not drafted the contract yet. I'll look at that closely, but we're very conscientious about penalties at the end of the project. Unfortunately,
Councilmember Wright, that's something that we work on with our construction attorney, Robert Cox.
Right.
So that's a standard provision of any construction contract the city has entered into.
Great. And then lastly, I know in previous construction contracts, the way that disputes have been resolved has to do with arbitration, where both parties pay the cost of arbitration. And I'm wondering if we might consider something where the loser pays the cost of arbitration. It usually makes the wrong person on the side of the suit more willing to settle.
I think you're referring to a prevailing party clause.
What's that?
It's referred to as a prevailing
Yeah.
party. That's certainly something that we can discuss with Mr. Cox. Typically, the city has either had mediation and arbitration provisions. Obviously, another alternative is just to say the parties waive that and go to litigation. That certainly is costly as well. So we can certainly bring up all options with Mr. Cox and see
Great.
what he recommends.
Thank you. The one last question I have has to do with this. You described it as tight, the space between the.
That's like 6 feet,
6 feet.
6 or 7 feet.
And we're sure that isn't, I know it sounds like it passes handicap accessibility, but it doesn't, there's not a fire egress issue there or anything like that?
I will double check. It looks like it's okay. Certainly, the reception desk that's there can be altered if there were a need to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Would somebody like to introduce the
Move it.
ordinance? Moved by Councilmember Stevens, seconded by Councilmember Wright. Any further comment from the council? Is there any public comment on this single reading ordinance awarding a contract for renovation of the auditorium?
Hello, my name is Mr. Lovelace again. And when you guys do the renovation on the auditorium, have you guys ever thought about the stuff that you take out in the demolition phase, like the seats and the stuff?
Yes, that's all part of it.
Can that be resold to recoup some of the,
I think we're going to auction it off like Yankee Stadium, right?
that's what I'm thinking. I was thinking that we could try to recycle and also to sell off the materials to other organizations that may be able to put it to a good use, rather than just throwing it all away. And that way you might be able to recoup some of our expenditures on this.
Like Tacoma Park, nuclear-free mulch.
That's right. Actually, how we dispose of anything in here is subject to lead points, so we want to make sure that things can be reused, sold for other use, or recycled in the correct way. So every single element that we're taking out, we're looking at very closely. And then even the stuff that just has to be thrown away is still calculated and sent to the right recycling center.
Yeah, because I used to do renovation too, and I used to recycle the locks and the hardware, the hinges, the seats, and everything else. And you'd be surprised what you'd get back from all that. You'd be really surprised. I mean, probably everything can be either donated or recycled or sold. And that way we can recoup our losses, because it's going to be a very expensive thing in today's economy. We also got to really think about how much do we really need this done, and also what we can do to keep our expenditures down as best as possible because, you know, there are people out there who can't even afford to put food on their plate or afford to pay their rent and getting foreclosed on. And it's not very good image to have a multi-million-dollar thing being done in the middle of something like that. It could turn out to be an embarrassment. But the thing is, though, is if we have to do it, I think we should try to recycle everything we take out of here, and also to try to keep the prices down as much as possible. We ought to keep it in our mind that it's the city's money, the people's money we're spending on this. We're going to do everything we can to preserve that, because eventually we're going to need that money for something else if this economy goes down the tank any further. You know, because it looks like it could go either way. We make it, economy may improve, but we got to be prepared for the day it doesn't, because we weren't ready for it this time. And I'd like to see what we can do to make this thing a lot more sensible, and to make it fit our needs, and also without wasting too much money and too much materials, because there are ways of doing that. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, and I'm sure there will be a huge market for these lovely orange chairs with the baby stuff colored frames.
Somebody might want them, you know, they're still usable. Think about that.
My name is Naveed Nasser. I just have one quick question. Obviously haven't read this whole thing from cover to cover, but this may sound like a silly question, but where will the council be meeting in that 5 to 6 month stretch while construction is going on?
Not a silly question at all. Actually, the council will be meeting in the Azalea Room in this building, and part of the cable television fund will allow for videotaping and from that room.
And it'll also broadcast live from that room.
Right.
And we're also, this is scheduled to take place with 2 of the months of the project being when we take our August break and our December break. And I'm also intending to have the council go other places in the city, as we did with the sector plan meeting over at the restaurant on University Boulevard, hoping to find opportunities for the council to go other places and have either council meetings or other types of meetings throughout the city. And the first one that I'm trying to set up is for September 15th, when instead of a meeting in this building, we will go to Public Works and look at that proposed project for the renovation of Public Works.
Sounds good.
Could I also suggest maybe that we do a meeting somewhere in Old Town to discuss the liquor license issue? Might be something we do later on in the winter.
all suggestions are welcome. We'll take the opportunity that this presents where we don't have the space to meet and go out other places.
It is my understanding that the current council chambers are not connected to emergency power. And I was told, but I don't know this for sure, that the planning for this includes to provide the entire building with emergency power.
I appreciate you mentioning that. I will double check. I don't know the details on that estimate.
Larry Silverman again. I don't want to take two bites of the apple, but I think one of the reasons that municipal government should go green and to look at alternative energy is not just to reduce the cost and the environmental and the economic costs of their operations, but also to serve as a model for the private sector. And it looks like you've done a tremendous amount of work, and I hope at some point this is a good example of how you could be a catalyst with the real estate owners and residential people too. Share with them and maybe hold seminars or meetings some of the obvious very professional and thoughtful and deep research that you've done into these subjects. You know, what kind of photovoltaics and other elements of that sort. I think that when a municipal government does that, not just for itself, but does it have to be a leader for its community, then you're doing the job. And I think if you only look narrowly at your own facilities, you're not quite doing it. That's the only comment.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we agree. Other public comments? Final council comments? Okay, this is a single reading ordinance. Therefore, we will need a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Victoria.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
The ordinance passes, and the project will go forward.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. We now have our consent agenda, which is all of the items listed on the agenda, but for item B, which we will take up after the consent agenda. And just as a reminder, this has two single reading ordinances, one for the authorization of cable equipment and installation, and the second one for the contract to conduct a residence study, and then it has 4 resolutions providing for appointments and reappointments and our summer recess. Would somebody like to move the consent agenda?
Move.
Do I hear a second? Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Robinson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Mayor, you need a roll call vote because of the single reading.
I said that, and then I didn't do it. We need a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Victoria.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
The consent agenda passes unanimously. We will now take up the item resolution establishing a task force on environmental sustainability. Councilmember Wright asked that that item be removed. Would you like to go first?
Well, I wanted it removed because I felt like we had a lot of discussion last week, and I don't think anything changed from the week last week, so I was sort of surprised that none of the comments were reflected. And second, I wanted to make sure that we had some discussion, reached agreement around 7, which I think is the thing that very clearly articulates the scope of what it is we're charging the committee to do, and wanted to make sure we felt like the scope was aggressive enough, was focused enough, and included the pieces that we wanted. So that was my main point in it. I do have a few things that I would suggest that I would be interested to see if my council colleagues would support, and would be open to any other changes that people had, and would be interested in discussing those. So I don't know if you want to move it and then amend it, or if I should just make suggested amendments.
I'd welcome your moving it, and then we can go from there, or If you think you have substantive things, we can hold off and then just incorporate the whole thing and move it that way.
Why don't we hold off and then we, okay.
And if I can just say that, yes, we did discuss a number of things last week, but we didn't really come to any conclusion about any particular things we wanted, so we figured lacking that direction, we would just go forward with what there was.
And maybe that's a lesson for us in the future, like maybe we should be more specific and vote on specific things that we want changed so that staff can bring back something that's maybe we're more ready to sign on to. Councilmember Snipper has that.
I have a concrete suggestion on this. It's fairly common to make a task the reporting back, an early task, you know, the first couple of weeks, reporting back to us just exactly what they plan to do and kind of a design document of what they're going to do and a timeline for when they're going to do it. And then that would give us an opportunity to react early on if we thought they were off track or had a great idea we hadn't thought of.
I definitely support that.
And if I can also add that since we're going to need to appoint the task force, that if we have any further refinements or expansions of what we would like them to do, we can add those elements at that point in time when we appoint them. We can provide them with a clarifying document if we feel that's necessary. We can, you know, go as broad or as narrow as we need to give them good direction. Councilmember Robinson.
I don't know how my colleagues would feel about a simple renaming of this task force from environmental sustainability to environmental action, which at least puts a word out there, an active word out there to help them understand that we want to become or remain environmentally sustainable, whatever that means. It's a little unclear. The word is a little unclear, but at least action will be something that has a little bit more active implication.
And I'm sure the city manager could provide us a lot of information on the word sustainability, since she serves on a sustainability task force for somebody, ICMA or somebody. Do I hear support for Councilmember Robinson's suggestion to change it to a task force on environmental action?
I would support that, yes.
I see yeses and okay, so we will make that change. Other suggestions at this point? Councilmember Wright?
Excuse me, if I may interrupt. I just wanted to know if the other things that have been suggested, if those were also included. You had made a suggestion, and Councilmember Snipper had also made a suggestion. So both of those are on the list.
That
we've agreed to those?
Are people happy with further refinements to the task for the task force to get
an early report back, I think.
The early report, and when we name them, if we have additional things that we want to include, that we can make that clear at that point?
Okay. So we're saying an early report back with deliverables and timeline.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Councilmember Wright and then Councilmember Robinson.
I would be curious to see if my council colleagues would support a change to item number 5, which would change from the task force shall elect from among its members a chair, vice chair, and secretary, to the mayor shall appoint a chair or co-chairs and vice chair and secretary. My reason for this is I generally am very supportive of the democratic process, but I think this needs to move quickly. They don't have a lot of time. I don't want them to spend time on electing somebody. I think it's critical that they have people who, a chair that's a real taskmaster, and that might not happen in the politics of the voting that might go on in the committee. So that's my opinion.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. I support your goal. I think it's a good idea that we remove that responsibility from the committee and in the interest of speeding the process along, I think that as we appoint the members of the task force, it should be the council that appoints the chair or co-chairs for the committee or the task force, rather than just the mayor.
Councilmember Robinson, did you want to speak to that point, or did you want to go elsewhere?
Yeah, no, I'll speak to that point. I disagree, and I think that 5 should say the task force shall elect from among its a governance structure from among its members, and then let them choose both if they're co-chairs or chairs, and to make that decision themselves. I'll go back to TASD again. There was a solid sense in the first meeting who was stepping up to the plate, who was willing. It was very clear what the task was, and it worked well. And there was a real sense that to kick it off with that first task showed that the mayor and council were trusting of the process.
And I'm perfectly happy to let the committee come up with their leadership.
I am also.
You're the swing vote down there.
Oh, Lordy. Well, it already seems to be 3 and 2. I'm in the middle. I see good points to both of your arguments, but given that we have quite a few people with a lot of environmental experience, and I can think of at least a half dozen who are a force to be reckoned with in this town, so deciding amongst them on ourselves kind of decides the trajectory of the task force and could cause some hard feelings. I defer to Dan's experience with TASD, and I think I'd leave it as is.
Okay, so we will leave the language here as it is, or we'll say the task force shall elect from among its members its leadership.
I don't care.
Its leadership is good.
I don't care.
It'll be either co-chairs or.
Okay, we'll make that change to in number 5. We'll make that task force shall elect from among its members their leadership.
We choose chaos.
Councilmember Robinson, did you have other?
No, that was the point I wanted to speak.
Councilmember Wright? Okay, Councilmember Victoria.
There are a lot of ambitious points under point 7. I'm hesitant to add to the load here. However, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't have something with a reference to a social justice outlook for these issues. There are tremendous diversity in ethnic groups, in socioeconomic status in this city, and an outlook on what are the most important environmental issues. And a great number of environmental groups have been looking at problems of urban areas, problems of pollution and other things, undesirable aspects being situated in poorer communities. I'd like to have something in there that references looking at those needs.
Okay. If you'd like to draft a sentence or two and be ready with those in a few minutes. I'll see if there's any other comments on the dais. Councilmember Wright?
Under the 3rd bullet point in 7, I would like at the beginning of that first sentence to add, so it would read, create and recommend a 5-year plan for improving the environmental sustainability of the city government, its residents, and businesses. So it's not just, when I read the city, it made me, and then when you read the bullet points, it made me concerned that we weren't being clear that it's beyond the city government. Mm-hmm. And then under bullet point 4, would like to change it so it says, review the city's local action plan for reducing greenhouse gas emission and recommend revisions that will establish goals that meet or exceed federal, state, and county and metropolitan Washington Council of Government plans. So we feel if, there's clearly the leeway to not just be consistent, but to exceed.
Okay,
Can I add to that, not same point?
yes.
How would you guys feel about the first sentence? You didn't have modifications to the first sentence, I don't think. Did you, Councilmember Wright?
Is this the first bullet or the fourth bullet?
I thought we were on the third bullet.
We were just on the fourth bullet.
Oh, okay. I have something for the third bullet, so
Okay.
I'll wait till we're done with the fourth bullet.
I'm done with the fourth bullet.
Councilmember Robinson on the third bullet.
On the third bullet, I'd like to see it say, create and recommend a 5-year plan to begin a no-carbon path for the city. I think that's as clear as environmental sustainability, and I think it's strong language.
Will you, I think I'm very supportive, but I want to understand what no carbon path means.
There are folks that are promoting this idea of a no-carbon path. There's a no-carbon Britain movement going on right now, where they're trying to get to, obviously it's a very ambitious goal, but a no-carbon footprint. You make as much energy as you use. We won't get there in our lifetimes, but it's going to be nip and tuck.
Right, but that makes it problematic to have a 5-year plan for a no-carbon path.
To begin a no-carbon path.
Okay.
To begin a no-carbon.
That's going to be a very key word.
So would you give us that proposed language again?
Create and recommend a 5-year plan to begin a no-carbon path for the city.
I do,
Councilmember Snipper.
thank you, Mayor, and I should have asked. I do worry that is a little, I hate to say limiting, because there are other environmental issues that have either no or little carbon footprint impacts. So the reason I liked environmental sustainability is I thought it included reducing our carbon footprint.
Like water quality and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Yeah, I think I like the broad piece, the language that's in there. I agree with Councilmember Snipper that we don't want to be too confining.
yeah,
in
we
just
can
looking
let
at
them
carbon.
figure out how close to a no-carbon path they want to get, I guess.
Yeah, and that exactly, they could.
And that could be a component of what comes back.
Sure. Design plan.
All right.
Councilmember Wright.
Two other components I haven't come up with exact language yet for, but one is, I do agree that there's many environmental issues, but I also feel like we should give them a sense of priority about what we think is most important. And so I'd be interested in having language in there that prioritizes the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon neutral, whatever you want to call it, as the highest priority goal would be one. And then the second one is, how do we articulate this idea of biggest bang for the buck? Because I feel like could be lots of ideas floating out there, but again, we need to come back to how can we, for the money that we spend, get the most reduction. So those, I'm happy to think about language over here, but I'd be curious if people are generally supportive of those ideas or not.
I was just trying to come up with language for that one.
I have a comment on it.
And if I can just try adding on that third one, so that it would read, create and recommend a 5-year plan for improving and the environmental sustainability of city government, residences, and businesses, and for prioritizing improvements or in prioritizing improvement goals.
Sorry, I said improving.
To add to the end, either prioritizing improvements or prioritizing improvement goals, whichever seems to work best. Somebody, Councilmember Robinson, you had something.
I'd make a minor change to what you just suggested, which I think is pretty good, Mayor Williams, and that is to put the idea of a template in there or a way to calculate priorities over time so that this can be something that can be a tool for
So that it could be prioritizing and calculating improvement goals?
I had some words and I've kind of forgotten. Yeah, benchmarks is good. I was thinking of a way to analyze. I mean, we've asked them to look at each part of the city. That's good. I'd like to see. It's more than benchmarks and key indicators of what we produce, what kind of, I'll call it waste products we produce. It's more of what I'm trying to think. What I'm trying to suggest is a template for how to evaluate our different the different parts within the city and the broader community. I'm not being clear, I know. I'll think about it some more. Maybe it'll come.
Okay, and I'll go to Councilmember Snipper, and then I'll go back to Councilmember Victoria for her language.
Pressure's on.
Councilmember Snipper.
On the third bullet where we were wrestling a bit about how to indicate some priorities, I think just a separate sentence. We urge priority for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and, I hate to use the phrase biggest bang for the buck, but I couldn't think of anything else better without having a lot of long multi-syllable words. If someone has a better language for biggest bang for the buck,
Can put it in quotation marks.
maybe put it in quotation marks then. But I like the idea of explicitly
Or
saying.
largest gain for the smallest investment.
Thank you,
There we
thank
go.
you. Largest gain for the smallest investment.
Okay, so you're writing that out so that as we go through these and say what these changes are, you'll have that one.
Yes.
Councilmember Victoria, do you have your language?
Yeah. I'd like a point that says recommend a plan for including and incorporating the environmental concerns and priorities of working class and lower income city residents. I'm not sure that's exactly what I want to say, but I want to specifically address how these committees tend to be a small slice of city population.
Councilmember Wright?
Is the concern, because the environmental movement is frequently, or environmental damage is often disproportionately impacts low-income people, as you said. So is the issue that we want to make sure that those opinions from lower-income communities are heard within the plan, or do we actually want to make sure that the plan dictates that there be some equality around how we handle the environmental impacts of the residents?
Somewhat both, but I think more of the latter, the equality of environmental impacts and the realization that if you live in a building that has persistent lead in the pipes, that's your top issue, and the rest of this be hanged.
Right.
So
Councilmember
Yeah.
I have suggested, I like these to be a little general, so how about in our prioritized sentence that I was proposing, we had prioritize largest gain for the smallest investment, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and accounting for social justice issues. Trying to be a bit more general.
I will go, can we say issues and priorities?
Sure.
I will go along with that. Thank you, Councilman.
Have we beat this horse within an inch of its life? Can we now just go back, make sure we have all of the pieces, that the clerk has all of the language, or the little pointers to the people who do have the exact language, so that we agree on what we're passing. This is now going to be called a resolution establishing a task force on environmental action, and it'll have the first change is in the now therefore be it resolved clause number 5. The task force shall elect from among its members their leadership. Then in number 7, the third bullet will be create and recommend a 5-year plan for improving the environmental sustainability of city government, residents, and businesses. And then Councilmember Snipper has the language that is going in that one, or is your, any, okay.
That's- yeah.
So, what's that?
And it's, I don't have quite the beginning, but something like we prioritize or we urge.
Oh, well, I had suggested at the end of that sentence saying, and prioritizing,
I was urging a separate sentence.
Oh, okay,
It's so
well then.
long, but either way, and then the largest gain for the smallest investment, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and accounting for social justice priorities.
and what's the first couple words of that sentence?
Yeah, that was what I wasn't entirely clear on. The council urges priority.
Prioritization?
Yeah, I hate that word.
Urges that the task force prioritize?
Yes, thank you.
Mayor Williams?
Yes.
I think my tools concept has come back to me, and that is that I think the tools that we really need are, might include recommended policies for us on how to shift our thinking to become more aggressive in going down this path. So I'm back to my time at the committee, the COG committee. And do you think we could put maybe in that same bullet point 3, I don't know if it fits there, the plan should consider vehicle use, fuel use, facility efficiency, purchasing preference for recyclable and green products, use of alternative, less environmentally damaging products, and other policy incentives or other policy recommendations.
Sure. Replacing
With
et
that.
cetera with and other policy recommendations? The fourth bullet was changed to be review the city's local action plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and recommend revisions that will establish reduction goals that meet or exceed state, county, and COG plans. And then we're back to the exact language for the addition to number 3 that included Councilmember Victoria's points, and Councilmember Snipper has that language.
Yes, the council urges that the task force prioritize the largest gain for the smallest investment, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and accounting for social justice priorities.
And that's inserted into number 3?
Yes.
Where? As the second sentence?
Big number 3.
Yes, second sentence.
Okay. We have it all.
And what, was there a bullet point that was about the early reporting back? Did we do that? Did you do,
Oh, yes.
an early report back with,
Forgot that.
with specific deliverables and timeline, or is that just something you want to give them direction on when everyone's appointed?
If you can give the sentence now, we'll do it now.
Doesn't quite work with, should focus, well, it could, it's on its work, providing the council with a set of deliverables and timeline as its first task,
Yes.
as its,
So this is a
it would be the first bullet
first
point.
bullet.
Yes.
What was the phrase, timeline and?
Read us the bullet again.
Would say, provide the council with its deliverables and timeline,
Provide the council with the task forces.
task force's deliverables and timeline for the duration of its term or whatever, because it's only a 6-month term.
Well, why are we doing that? We know how long they have.
I thought the thing that Councilmember Snipper was saying, which I liked a lot, was that we are giving them direction, but we're not specifying exactly the deliverables they're going to give us back, or the time frame in which they're going to do it. But they're going to come back. So it sort of creates a dialogue where they come back and say, here's specifically what we're going to do, and this is the time frame in which we're going to do it.
How about if we change it slightly, provide the council with the task force action plan and timeline, so that they would kind of tell us what they're going to do. Well, that was my thought. Not deliverables per se, because deliverables could be a report at the end, an interim report and a final report.
Right.
In a certain way, we're asking them for a report at the end of 6 months. I mean, that we're giving them 6 months, and then we're telling them all the stuff we want back. So that's going to be in the form of some report.
We're asking for something up front, though.
Yeah,
And
this
what-
is meant to be very upfront.
So it's upfront, so they'll say, well, in a month we'll give you draft A, and in 2 months we'll give you draft B, and in 6 months, in 5 months we'll give you draft D.
And I
And then
think
is the expectation that we'll then give them feedback saying, well, we
Right.
like these elements, but we want, so we're trying to build in the dialogue? Is that what we're trying to do between them and us during the course of this 6 months
I
period?
thought what you wanted to do is maybe give them time to come back to us with their reaction to the document after
Right.
they've met once or twice.
Yes,
Ah.
that was it.
I'm sorry.
Not a repeated, just a one-time only report.
What did you really mean by?
That's right.
Oh, okay, so an opportunity
So-
to clarify? We want
I
to
think-
build in an opportunity to clarify?
Can I
No,
suggest
they're going
that?
to develop.
Can I suggest that we just make that a direction to them when we appoint them, and it's up to the mayor to schedule them coming back, and that will happen?
Okay.
It's okay with me.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, we have now we've beat the horse and we've made sausage.
Ooh.
Any other metaphors? Is there any public comment on this now fairly convoluted, beat to death, but hopefully clearer resolution? Seeing none. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. We will now move to our work session and the annual report from Colta. We are going to have a break, but they've been sitting here all evening, and we don't want to make them take the break. Well, welcome to all of you, and thank you for your patience.
Sure. Well, I am Moses Junior, staff representative to the Commission on Landlord Tenant Affairs, commonly known as COLTA. To my left is the Vice Chair of COLTA, Ms. Joanne Hill, and to my right, Mr. Jared Smith, who is the chairperson. Since you all have the document, and hopefully you all have had a chance to look it over, I'm not going to read it. But as you will note, COLTA is a very active group. And for those new council members, COLTA is the entity that addresses landlord-tenant disputes that the landlord-tenant mediation specialist, Moses, cannot address. I'm very proud of COLTA. I speak of it all over, wherever I travel, wherever I go, because I think that COLTA represents what citizens can and should be actually doing. These people volunteer their time, but we actually meet here. So I was very curious when the deputy city manager was talking earlier regarding how much time this space is not going to be used. I guess that goes to have to find some other place to have our COLTA meetings. All right, having said that, I think that Ms. Hill, Mr. Smith is going to start.
So I'd just like to say that thank you very much for having us today. One thing about COLTA that Mr. Wilds has been able to do for us is by mediating cases that come before his office, the commission has not been hearing as many cases that it has done in the past. And we attribute that to Mr. Wilds helping the commission and trying to bring both parties together to come to some type of resolution. The other thing that has been very important as his office has these work sessions for landlords and tenants to come in and let the landlords know what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and also to give the tenants the rights that they should be aware of. I think that's about it, and I thank the council very much for allowing me to once again sit on the commission, and I would like to give it to my fellow commissioner, Ms. Hill.
And I would also like to say that the commission as a whole is very, very happy working with the staff, Moses, Jean, and Linda. They do an excellent job in reducing the number of times that we have to do hearings. Also, the commission is a very diverse group and does represent. We have people on the commission from all aspects of the residents of the city. We have tenants, we have landlords, we have property owners, we have all socioeconomic groups, we have professional people, we have lawyers, we have everybody. So I think that COLTA, more than any other committee in this city, represents a cross-section of the citizens of Tacoma Park, and I appreciate the diversity of the committee and the opportunity to serve on it.
And it was interesting to hear you say lawyers and professionals.
They are sometimes not the same.
Councilmember Seaman.
Thank you all for coming here tonight, and thank you for the great work that you do. This is one of the more important functions we have in the city, and I appreciate your dedication. I'd like to call to the attention of my colleagues that we frequently hear about the apathy in Ward 4, that we don't have many residents participating in city government business, but that Ward 4 has more representatives on COLTA than any other ward in the city. So I think when it is within the interests of the community members are willing to step to the plate and put the time and effort in to work on the important things that are important to them. Again, I'm glad to see the broad range of representation, not just as Ms. Hill had pointed out, but also that it is also a cross-section of the city geographically also. I just have a question for you, and that is, how are things going? What would you like to see change in the policy, either in the housing policy or in the policy that governs COLTA?
Well, I'm glad you brought that question up. The one thing that we are working on, and this has been brought up to the executive director, Ken Sigmund, that's with the city's attorney's office, is changing the subpoena clause in that housing code, because currently if a subpoena is issued, the city does not have the power to force anyone to appear before the commission. Also, some participants like to use the subpoena clause as a runaround when documents are due before the commission. So if we could tighten up some of these issues, it'd be very helpful to actual hearings.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Matthews, I wonder if maybe the Housing Department could bring back some specifics to the council on changes we could make to implement that. The other question I had, my last question is, with the cases that you have seen, I notice a significant decrease in the rent stabilization, rent increase petitions, and what do you attribute that to?
Councilmember, that's not really in my area, but I'm going to try to address it. I think that, as you well realize, that the rent stabilization law was changed last year. As a direct result of that change, we now have a new process. And I think that landlords are getting acclimated to that process. The Housing Office has recently instituted a training program for city landlords, whereby they will be brought up to speed as to what their job is under this new process. As you know, since you have write the changes, we got rid of one aspect of the rent stabilization law. We kind of merged the hardship into this new process. And so I think personally, without any documentation, that that's why you see those numbers down.
Okay, thank you. You know, I said that was the last question, but since I sit on this side of the table, I always have the right to change my mind. I would be curious on I know that there are certain rules that the landlords must follow, and yet I think that for some of those rules, there's not really strong teeth. I give you an example is the landlord has to notify tenants, you know, a certain time in advance before they visit the tenant's apartment for an inspection, and yet I frequently get complaints from tenants that the landlords don't follow those rules rigorously, and it's not all landlords, it's some specific landlords that repeatedly will violate that requirement. And yet it seems that our housing department doesn't have the tools it needs to make that happen other than just to remind the landlords. And I wonder if you could speak to that. I had any recommendations because I think a lot of times those things end up into complaints to you on COLTA, and it's something that maybe we could circumvent by having better controls so it doesn't have to go to a mediation.
Well, I mean, currently the way the code is written, there aren't really a lot of things that the commission can do if the landlord doesn't follow the law. I mean, we can put together a modest fine, or we could just tell the landlord not to do it. But I mean, there isn't anything really in the code that says that if you do not give the tenant a certain amount of time before you enter their premises, there's nothing we can follow up with it. The other issue is if a tenant requests that a landlord make a change, or if there's something that's broken in the apartment, the way the code is written out, the landlord has, I think it's up to 15 days that they can go into that apartment. The only thing that they need to do is they need to give some type of documentation that states that they have entered into the apartment once they've come in and made the repairs.
I think, in summary, what I think would be helpful, since you guys are down where the rubber meets the road, is if you could come back to the council with recommendations for improvements. As we saw, we made some changes last year, and it has improved it seems to have improved the code in that particular instant. And maybe there's things that you can suggest that would also make improvements.
Okay, we can do that.
Appreciate that.
If I might just add one last thing, Councilmember. The Culture Executive Director, Mr. Sigmund, regularly looks at thoughts from the commission, from our office. I think we've made changes to the landlord-tenant law. We've made some fairly significant changes, and we will certainly look at making some more. On that issue, on that single issue, the single issue of entry. When I went to law school, they taught us that you have to single out where there are actual damages. Now, and I am not by any means saying that a person is not perhaps emotionally damaged if someone enters their unit without giving them notice. But I think we need to be cautious here. We have a very small staff, as you well know, and there are only so many things that we can do. We do follow up. If a tenant calls me and says, Moses Jarrett, who is a landlord, by the way, entered my unit and he did not give notice, he can tell you that I will be on him, and that usually stops. So having said that, I mean, obviously there are some changes that we can come back to you, some things that we can recommend, and we certainly will.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Robinson and Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you for coming. I've not attended a COLTA hearing. I might try to do so.
Tomorrow night in the Azalea Room.
7 p.m.
Be careful with your promise.
I'm also, I sense that there's a mediative aspect, or a sense that people come and there's a problem and you try to resolve it in an appropriate way. I understand that. I also know that running an apartment building is a business, and that the rent stabilization law has an effect on how business is conducted. And I know that there are times when transparency in business is an asset, that there are ways that you can run a business which makes the consumer or you feel more comfortable. And I wonder if you have any specifics, that I guess it's along the same lines of what Councilmember Siemens is saying. What could be done to improve the business-like aspect or way that landlords conduct their business? Do you think about that? Are those kinds of things? Do those kinds of things come to your mind? The kind of wish list?
I would think that that's what the training is supposed to. Yeah.
That's what, I'm sorry, that's what the landlord certification training, which this panel, not these very members, but the council directed that we, the housing office, do. That has been extremely helpful. We're now seeing perhaps some landlords are on their second to third cycle, so they've been through at least 3 different classes. And we have seen a change in their overall thinking regarding how they address tenants, how they deal with their tenants. So that has been very helpful. Let me add one other thing. I also write a monthly article in the city newsletter. It is entitled Housing Mailbox. And in that mailbox, I address questions, in theory, posed by tenants and by landlords. And we give answers to those questions based on the city code. I think that also has been helpful. As you know, it is a business, as Mr. Smith was always telling me, and it's a very thin line that we have to walk. But I've been doing this now for 6 years. The landlords know me. They know that as the boxing referee in Las Vegas says, I'm firm, but I'm also fair. And I think that always helps.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this report. And I appreciate your answering my question ahead of time of why the number of cases filed has dropped. And I think that's a much better solution, is to work with folks before they get to COLTA to do this. Once you start into a semi-adversarial sort of situation, things often go downhill. So it's better to do it ahead of time. I really appreciate that. One thing I want to make clear is I'm a very strong supporter of the rent stabilization law in Tacoma Park. I think it's one of the things that makes Tacoma Park, frankly. It brings us a lot of diversity here, and it makes us a very attractive community because of it. And I know many of my neighbors who are homeowners also support it for the exact same reason. And under that, I want to be clear also that I want the landlords to succeed. I don't want them failing, because then we're going to have foreclosures, or we're going to have the buildings sold, and where will the tenants go, and so on. So I'm a very strong supporter of giving the landlords all the tools they can. And I have attended some of the classes that have been given, and I thought they were really excellent. I really applaud your work, as well as the other people in the housing department for this. And I urge you to devote some time to think, and Jared Smith could be a good resource on here, because he'll know the successful landlords. What are the tricks for making it work in Tacoma Park? Tacoma Park is a special environment. It takes a landlord who knows how to control their costs and keep those apartments filled. When I talk to tenants in the buildings in my ward, and you're in Ward 5 also, they tell me the tenants in the building like rent stabilization, because what they find is if there is a tenant that's noisy or has some other problem, they can go to the, they know they can go to the landlord. They can say, look, we think the tenant in, B is not up to snuff, and they know that the landlord will have an easy time, filling that apartment because the rents are lower in Tacoma Park, and you're going to get a bigger number of applicants because the rents are low. So the landlord can choose, I hope wisely, among a larger pool. And it's kind of thoughts like that to help landlords realize, some of the leverage that they have to make it work. And so I do urge you to give a little bit of thought, perhaps using the resources of landlords or anyone else, to, when you do those training sessions, devote a little time to helping the landlords think about, well, make sure you think about this and make sure you think about that as a way of helping them succeed. Thanks.
I like your point that it's essentially that we should be in the position of kind of sharing with the landlords the secrets to making successful business in Tacoma Park at being a landlord. Nobody's trying to hide the answers, the best answers for the way to go forward, but to kind of 5 easy steps on how to do it, given our law, which is like no other. Any other questions from the council? Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
We will take a short break, and we will come back in 9:40 on the clock in the back. That's 9 minutes. Gang of 5. And Public Works Director is here, and do you want to introduce who's here? Does the city manager want to say a few words?
I'll make a few words, make a few comments if I may, and then turn it over to Daryl. We were last before the council 3 weeks ago, and at that time, our architects on the project, Bignell, Watkins & Hasser, presented the proposed master plan. In the intervening 3 weeks, what we've been working to do is try to refine certain elements of the plan and certainly, I think, answer some of the questions that the council had posed 3 weeks ago. I think, as I recall your questions, you wanted a more clear sense of what the different project components cost. There was also considerable discussion by the council about the green features that were contemplated. So hopefully some of the information we have presented this evening answers some of those questions, and I know that the architects are going to do a presentation that will hopefully elaborate on what's in the agenda packet. Since the council will be going on recess after this evening, if possible, the direction that I would hope to get at the end of this work session, I guess, would be twofold. If there are certain elements in the project that the council feels strongly about one way or the other that definitely must be part of this project, or that you would really prefer that we not include, and I think certainly tied to that is what is the construction budget that the council desires to stay within. I think, as you may recall from the budget process this year, we really didn't have a sense, pending any kind of feasibility study, of what we were looking at in terms of construction costs, which is why we hired a firm that is before the council this evening. Just as sort of a placeholder budget, we put a figure of $2 million into the FY 2010 budget, not knowing what that would get us. And I think that's been part of the work that the firm has done as part of Phase 1. As mentioned in the cover sheet, and we can certainly talk about this following the presentation, the finance director and I have talked about what flexibility, if any, I guess we mutually agreed there was in terms of any elements the council may wish to see in the renovation project that might cause the overall construction budget to go beyond that $2 million. And she and I both agree that there is some flexibility if the council chooses to go in that direction. that could be done without negatively impacting the city's financial condition. I think some things that I know I talked to the firm about when Darrell and I met with them a few weeks ago is certainly the cost estimates that are included reflect the favorable bidding climate that we find ourselves in now. If this project were to be broken into several phases and perhaps work would not be done several years from now, I think certainly there would be additional mobilization costs that we would see that are not reflected in the numbers before you this evening, and it's very likely, hopefully, if the economy recovers, that pricing may not hold as it is today. As we talked about a little bit during this year's budget process, certainly the bond financing climate is about the best it's been in quite a while. I can't certainly sit and predict what it would look like a few years from now. So I think there is a number of factors that are very favorable at this time. I just wanted to call that to your attention as you listen to the presentation and ask your questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darrell to introduce everyone.
Sure. To my right, Greg Gilbert, Tom Bunting, Amy Smalt with the Bignell, Watkins & Hasser firm, and Michael Wiegand, who's with the engineering firm. They've got a PowerPoint presentation that we want to show this evening, so I think it'd be best if we get that started. And while you're setting up, I'll just reiterate that some of the things that we hope to dig into in greater detail this evening is the overall cost of the project to do what we need to do for the facility, the Public Works facility. What can be done with the current amount of money that's set up in the budget? What are the green features that are included in the cost estimate, and what are additional green feature costs if the council so desires to add them to the project? And another decision similar to what we've looked at with the auditorium is whether or not the council wants this project to be LEED certified, because there are some finite and definable costs associated with that. Whether you need to meet LEED certification or go beyond that, it has some financial implications for the budget and the scope of work for the project. So maybe with that, we'll just go start the PowerPoint, and then at the end of that, we should have be able to jump into those issues.
Okay, good. We'll come down. And once we come down there, if we can hopefully hold our questions and then come back up here, that way we don't have to worry about transferring microphones and all that, so that we'll get that all taken care of that.
This might be like sitting in the front row of the movie.
I need a screen on that.
Okay, thank you very much for having us here again this week. I'll begin by briefly giving you an overview of the existing site. Oswego Avenue is on your left, and Ritchie Avenue is on the boundary to your right. Next to Oswego Avenue is the current administration building. Here. The current sanitation storage building in the middle, the gardener's area here, the mechanic bays are here, locker facilities here, the right-of-way facility, and general covered storage in the south building. Once we began our assessments, we started looking at the things that were important in terms of priority. And what's begun to happen is those things sort of informed each other. The building in the center, the sanitation storage building, is probably the most in need of repair. It's been pretty severely damaged by trucks hitting the columns and so forth. So that building we looked at just removing altogether, which necessitated a new truck storage building here, and the storage for the mechanics parts was in that building, so that moved over here, where the current locker rooms are, which then informed this move here. So what we have here is the new sanitation bays and with its price tag, the new administration building with locker facilities. You can see it's just over $1 million. The renovation of the current locker rooms into mechanic storage, just over $200,000, and the renovation of the current storage shed.
Say something about the end of that first building. I recall that there was a truck washing facility there.
Okay, I'm about to show you what happened. That truck washing facility didn't make the first priority list. This, what you're seeing on the screen is what is, we believe, feasible within the $2 million budget. Then the second priorities, which you see in blue, include repaving of the entire public works yard, the truck washing facility, which is, as the mayor pointed out, right at the end of this building, the extension of the vehicle maintenance bays, the rework of the parking for the administration building, the rework of the Ritchie Avenue drive entrance, and the addition of these smaller storage bay units.
Are those second priority? Can they also be second phase? Or are these priorities that these are maybe less important?
Do you want to address that?
Sure, I can speak to that to some degree. It's a little bit of a mix. Certainly everything that you see on this list are things that were guided by the city's original RFP, which included a list of future needs identified by both city staff as well as the community of issues that we need to have addressed. Some are hard and fast, brick and mortar, failing structure in a building needs to be addressed. Others are employee comfort, bathrooms and locker rooms that are unworkable as they are now, showers that are unworkable as they are now. So some of them address real defects. Others of them make improvements to the way we can do our work and the way we handle certain things like truck washing, et cetera. The driveway aspects, I think there's an element of functionality in that, but there's also the issue of being more inviting for the front entrance and providing an easier place for people to access. What's not shown there is on the other side is our mulch pile, our used oil tank, et cetera. It's often very difficult to access those with this kind of additional parking off-street like that. It would improve the use of that. And then the other side of the driveway, the Ritchie Avenue issue has been raised as a concern for increasing the department's use of that driveway entrances, and as it currently stands now, due to the grade, there are limitations as to how many times our trucks can go in or out of that. So it's a bit of a mix. If we had a magic wand and could get the entire budget covered, they're all high priority needs. There's nothing in there that's...
They're all high priority, but these are second high priority.
Given the reality of
right, I think the whole concept is someone said you have X amount of dollars, and as they started putting the list in the order of things they wanted done, what ended up in the first bucket was what they had enough money for. Okay, so that's where the line was drawn.
Right. But it's not I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, and the mayor said save your question for when we're all done. I'll save my question.
Okay. Yes, but that is correct.
If we need to do it this way, we need to repeat the question, and we need to talk into the microphone rather than turning around and talking to us.
Okay.
Okay.
And this is the last time we'll have to do this.
All right.
Yeah, I know. We'll be in here in September doing it again.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to talk about the lead aspects of the project.
We also looked further into the lead since we last met. If you take a look at the spreadsheet that was distributed earlier, I don't know if anyone has it, we listed some of those strategies that we would be applying to each credit that we would be pursuing. And we also attempted to associate a cost with each of those strategies. After getting the numbers back, we divided up the strategies into strategies that would have zero to minimal impact on the building costs, strategies that would have limited impact, and strategies that would have a considerable impact on the building cost. What you see up here are all the credits that would have no to minimal impact on the cost. Some of these items would be items that would be included in the design regardless of whether we were pursuing LEED certification or not. Then we looked at where we actually would be if we were pursuing LEED certification, and based on that we would have 37 points, which is just a little bit short of the 40-point minimum for LEED certification. Cost-wise, we looked at the cost of these credits along with the cost of the commissioning, because commissioning is a prerequisite for LEED, so it would have to be included if we were pursuing that. So the cost of these credits along with commissioning would be an additional $30,000. If we were to go LEED certified, we'd have to include a few more credits. So we went to the second column on the spreadsheet, which are the credits that have a limited impact on the cost. And we selected a few credits that we felt we would be confident in our ability to get them and that would be the most cost-effective credits for this project. And there they are listed up there. Although we were at 37 and 40 is the minimum requirement, we recommend that we go for an extra few just because from our experience over the course of the project, certain things happen, and for whatever reason, we don't always end up getting all the points that we go for. So we'd like to have that buffer there so that we could get you LEED certified if that was the case. So the additional cost of these credits, along with the minimal impact credits and the commissioning, would be an additional $72,000 to $75,000. There would also be some design fees and energy modeling fees that would be required for some of the credits, looking at energy, optimizing energy efficiency. Finally, here's some other credits. These are on the left here. We have other credits listed here that have limited impact. These are ones that we could have pursued rather than the ones we chose, but as I said, we feel a little more confident in some of the other ones that we selected. On the right here, these are some credits and strategies that would have a considerable impact on the building cost. Some of these we discussed last time we met. For example, a vegetated roof. A vegetated roof is actually not required to get the heat island effect credit because we would be using a highly reflective roof regardless of whether it was LEED or not. However, it would also contribute towards stormwater management. And you'll find that with some of these other strategies. We associate them with one credit, but they do help contribute to other credits as well. So it's not just a one-point deal. For example, this rainwater harvesting we associate with water-efficient landscaping, but it also will help contribute to stormwater management. So.
I'm going to break the rule and ask a question if you can repeat it.
Sure.
The first 37 credits come cheaply. The
Yes.
next set of credits get a whole lot more expensive. Is there any way to put a number on or a sense of the impact on continued operational costs of that second set, or everything taken together? Is it paying money up front for a benefit mostly up front, or kind of what's the continuing payback on
Return.
expenditure?
Mike, could you speak to that? Yeah.
If I understand the question, you might be repeat the question.
That's what you're doing.
You're looking for information on, for example, what would be the return on investment?
Right.
especially this last group, which has some of the highest dollar figures. Pardon me.
That's all right. You
Okay.
can talk about that.
So the probably one of the ones that has the greatest impact overall is the geothermal system, which you can see has a listing for quite a large group of credits. It's going to be one of the most expensive items because we could do a very common but relatively efficient HVAC system, which would meet basic code requirements but not get you any lead points. Or we could go into this geothermal version of an HVAC system, which has a fairly substantial additional first cost, but has a very large energy efficiency savings that you'll be reaping throughout the life of the entire project. So it's one of those things where it's fairly intensive first cost, but you're going to have a payback period, and then once you get beyond the payback period, you're going to be reaping benefits throughout the life of the facility.
So return on investment is the criteria for picking additional items?
I would say it's a balancing act. Certainly, we're looking for a return on investment, but at the same time, we're trying to balance issues of sustainability.
You know, I want to understand I guess I feel like from the council's point of view, we're probably going to want to go for LEED certification, and there's a cost attached to it, and I want to understand the extent to which that cost is an upfront cost, but you get return on investment in the long run, therefore it makes sense. And how much of the component is that, and how much is just kind of the general sustainability piece?
Well, you'd really have to look at the individual credits to have a good understanding of which ones you're simply buying points versus which ones you might be considering if there was no LEED program, simply because of their energy efficiency and the return on investment. So the menu structure of the LEED program is very wide and varied in that there are certainly some items which are relatively simple to do and just cost money and get you a point, okay? And they have possibly an immediate benefit, such as when we're doing the purging of the buildings before occupancy, okay? But other ones like the geothermal system, and I focus on that because it's probably the most expensive and the most easy one to talk about in divorcing itself from the LEED program. I mean, it's a very sustainable practice, but many people put in geothermal systems for purely capitalistic reasons.
What kind of numbers are you talking about for geothermal? Have you done that kind of analysis?
No. This is we're very much in the preliminary programmatic stages of the project, so we haven't run any kind of economics. But typically,
put specific numbers on the two priority phases.
Well, we can talk about first cost numbers, but as far as what the payback periods are, I can talk in broad general terms from experience on other projects. Okay, geothermal water source heat pump systems typically have a payback period in the range of about 5 to 10 years, and really the issue is how many hours a day the system's working. The longer the system works, the shorter the payback period. Certainly, there's a geology issue in which you have to, what we typically do is put in a test well, 1 or 2 test wells, in order to determine a thermal conductivity of the ground, which we need to know in order to figure out how many wells and how deep they would be. So some sites are more cost effective than other sites.
And the broad range is 100,000 to $1 million? I mean, is that too broad? Or?
We do have a cost.
No, we have a reasonable cost
you have
estimate.
a cost. All right.
No, but what I'm saying is, as far as a payback period, if you wanted to know for an additional investment of X number of dollars, how quickly can I get that back? I can only talk to that in broad terms at the moment because we haven't identified the exact load because the buildings aren't designed yet. We haven't perform a thermal conductivity test. But I can tell you that for projects that we've done with Montgomery County Public Schools, for example, practically every new elementary school project is a geothermal water source heat pump system, unless there are site constraints which don't allow it to be applied purely on economic terms.
And I do recall that the city considered putting geothermal in this building and did test borings, and we were unsuccessful.
It was a highly specialized system related to the chiller that we had spec, so it was very much oriented towards a particular cooled water use for this chiller. It wasn't a geothermal in a traditional sense of heating and heat transfer. Did you include utility costs? Did that slide
No.
make it in?
No, I don't have that. I'm sorry.
It's in the packet.
Now, one thing I do want to caution you is I saw the utility costs, and it immediately struck me that we have to make sure that we get a baseline understanding of a couple of issues, what's going to happen with this project, regardless of whether we're trying to be energy efficient or trying to get LEED certification. And that right now you have a facility that was designed in a completely different era, in which all the primary mechanical systems have already reached the end of their useful life. Whatever we do today has to be built to current building codes, in which one of the things we're going to be doing on this project is to substantially improve the indoor air quality environment. And one of the ways that we're doing that is we're going to be ventilating the space. A number of these spaces currently, occupied spaces, aren't even heated, let alone ventilated, because the HVAC systems have failed. When we build these new spaces and we build them to current standards, we're going to be making them in some ways more energy intensive, because of course if you're not bringing in any outside air today to ventilate a space, and you're going to build a space and you're going to ventilate it, well, you certainly have to spend money to heat and cool that ventilation air. Now the issue is going to be, when you bring it up to this current standard, how can you do this in the most cost-effective manner possible? So simply looking at the utility costs for today's facility and trying to relate that to what's going to happen with your modernized facility is really going to cause problems, because it's apples and oranges. So what we want to do is we want to bring it up to current standards, and then we want to see what is a baseline level. And in doing the LEED program, one of the things that you'll be doing is that they will have a baseline requirement, in which we'll have to do an energy model, and when we're finished with the energy model, we'll be able to say that a well-designed building that gets you 0 points will cost you so much money to operate. And then we'll have the proposed project, and the more efficient it is, the more points you get. In other words, the more money that you save in your operating costs, the more points you get. So what we're trying to do, obviously, is to work within budget limitations, but to also maximize our efficiency.
That's the explanation for help.
I think that's PowerPoint.
I'm going to miss going to the movies like we do here.
We'll no longer be able to be the Wizard of Oz behind the screen. Your last explanation was very helpful to understand about the standards in the current building and the cost just to bring them kind of into the modern age, and for the health and well-being of the employees who work there, and to understand kind of, I think, the way I took what you were saying there at the end was, it's almost like understanding the energy efficiency and the LEED certification from that baseline, which we would still have to come up to from the current facility, so that there's that cost just to get to the baseline.
Absolutely.
That was very helpful. People have questions?
Well, I just want to make a clarification that as we went through the presentation here, I just wanted to make sure you understand that there's certain degrees of certification. So you can either just be certified, right, silver, that when we started putting the list together, those things that didn't cost any money or had very limited, you can still get your building certified without ever really going into the geothermal and the water collection and all those things. So part of my make sure that you understand is that if you choose to do these things, you know, it's more for the benefit of those items that you'd actually be doing, not I want to become certified, because I can get you certified without having to do those things.
Right. But my sense is that given where we are with our history on construction and renovation and remodeling projects in the city, that we have progressed from, gee, it would be nice to do environmentally green things and be LEED certified, but there's no way we can, we're too far down the road, it costs too much, to, yes, we want to do that, and with what we talked about first thing this evening with this project here, definitely going to get LEED certification. And I can't see us then saying, oh, and on this other project that we don't want to do LEED certification. I just don't see it. So that I think it's a question of understanding the degree to which we want to go beyond just certification, or whether just certification is where we feel comfortable, where we feel we can afford, given the costs of the whole project. So does anybody disagree that that a good assumption would be yes, LEED certification? Councilmember Wright.
I don't know that I would say I disagree. The challenge for me is that I'm not so interested in getting the LEED certification for the sake of getting LEED certification. Like, I was just looking at some of the things in terms of what we got points for. Like, I think it's nice that we put a bike rack there, but I would ask like, how many employees, if we have a bike rack there, are really going to bike that wouldn't bike? Well, but like, would you not bike now because there's not a bike rack? Right. So I know it's only a $3,000 item or something like that, but to me, it's more important that we truly have a green building, and as we talked about earlier tonight, to me the highest priority around that is lowest greenhouse gas emissions, as close to, you know, carbon neutral as we can get. And I'm sort of convinced that if we did that, we'd be green certified we'd be LEED certified anyway. So that's so I guess I'm agreeing with you. I think we will be LEED certified, but to me the priority needs to be I think what they classify as the atmosphere and environment. No, it's the terminology, a lot of the energy and atmosphere. Energy and atmosphere. It seems like those types of credits are the things that are most closely aligned with greenhouse gas emissions, carbon neutral footprint. Probably not perfectly, right? You probably get some benefit from the other ones, but so that makes me lean towards I do want to do geothermal, and I think the Montgomery County public school system probably knows something, which is that it makes economic sense in the not too distant, you know, not a huge payback, but it also, you know, I'd be curious about why we can't do photovoltaic, or, you know, why we can't get to a building that would be kind of truly zero.
Well, we certainly aren't proposing photovoltaics, but in a slightly different manner than the project you were talking earlier today. This project has quite a bit larger roof footprint available.
one of the items that we've talked about in the preliminary design process was that there are a number of private corporations which will go into an agreement with an organization like yourself, a government entity, who cannot take advantage of the tax breaks, where the private entity will come in and install the photovoltaics, will own them, and will sell you power at a below market rate. So there's a zero first cost impact. It's a very sustainable practice, and you have a reduction in your operating costs. So it's pretty much a win-win situation. A number of local government entities are involved in that, and there are quite a few large energy companies who are in need of these tax breaks, who are offering these contract services.
Can I also just point out one other issue, which is the challenge for me in trying to balance sort of even myself what to recommend. Given the cost estimates that we've gotten back from the architects, we have functional needs that won't be addressed by the current budget, regardless of whether we put a geothermal system or not. We have office spaces that won't be touched. We have buildings that will be 50 years old and won't be addressed. And so to me, that's the challenge of how to carefully manage the project and the budget so that in addition to being as green as possible, we're also providing the work environment that's needed to efficiently do the work, to keep employees heated, cooled, and otherwise good indoor air quality while they're working. I'm concerned that as we progress with this, we need to keep in mind that the list you see of the buildings there exceeds the budget, and if we are to add additional items that help with the footprint, we still are not addressing stated and clear deficiencies within the facility itself. So we have to sort of figure out how to marry those two and make sure that we're addressing the deficiencies in the facility as a whole, as well as tying as many component projects together to get us there.
And if I can just say a couple words about that, that it strikes me that this gets back to the issue that Councilmember Victoria brought up in the earlier discussion this evening about kind of social justice issues, and that I think it would be very difficult for us to, on the one hand, be making this building better for a lot of city employees and for residents, and then going to the Public Works facility and not addressing those workplace issues for people who are working there, who have been working in deficient facilities for some time. That I think we can't just kind of leave bring some folks into the modern age in terms of the facility that they're working in, and leave other folks with 50-year-old buildings that are just not up to the task. Council member, I'll just start at that end and work this way. Everybody has hands up.
Thanks for that, because I do want to respond to the work director's point about that. I'm sensitive to that, and I'm sensitive also to what Bruce mentioned, but I also, for me, you have a budget constraint, like you have a dollar constraint, and you have an environmental constraint, and that environmental constraint doesn't come out in dollars, but it comes out in damage you're doing, an externality that you're creating. And I feel like we have a moral obligation and a fierce urgency and now imperative to make sure that, we only get to do these buildings once every 50 years, so that we do it right in terms of the environment. And there are some trade-offs there about how, which buildings we do and how quickly we do it, but I feel like to build a building that doesn't abide by both of those constraints, the financial and the environmental, is a disservice. And I also think that if you can truly make the building green or zero footprint, you can sell that to the residents of Tacoma Park. And I think they're willing to have, pay more for that building, because many of the residents pay more to have those things done in their houses. So that's just my perspective on it.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for this presentation. Looks like a lot of work's been put into trying to see what we can do for the money that has been put in the budget, with some realization that it may take more than that. I think Ms. Braithwaite's focus on functionality is important. I know that one of the most important parts for the neighborhood is that it be functional within the neighborhood. And I would say that the egress on Ritchie Avenue is the only way that the neighborhood can support the project or the continuation of public works at that location. Oswego Avenue just is not adequate for the types of equipment that we're now using, and who knows what type of equipment is going to be in use by public works in years to come. So, regrading that ramp so it can be used has got to be within the first priority, so that the majority of the heavy equipment is going in and out, or all the heavy equipment is going in and out of the yard from Ritchie Avenue. So I think that's number one, has to be in the first priority, or there's going to be big pushback from the community. Environmentally, well, let's go back. I think Ms. Braithwaite's point on functionality is also important, that we have to make sure that that we have a first priority that addresses the most important functionality and provides good work space for all the employees. And what I heard in the presentation is that those that were labeled first priority, the yellow ones on the slides, I think do address that with the new locker rooms and the new...
They address the structurally deficient buildings and inadequate locker and bathroom facilities that we currently have. There are other workplace priorities that aren't addressed in the first round.
Okay. I recall a couple of those with the gardener space and I think the vehicle maintenance area was...
Expanding the equipment maintenance space so they can work on trucks within the bay and not have to bring trucks outside to work on them. We currently can't fit our trash trucks within the structure that we have.
Okay. So I would be interested in kind of what, if there's a little bit of priority 2 that might be included in priority 1 that would kind of finish those issues out for the staff. And then environmentally, I would just say, first of all, I'm sure that you've seen your neighbor 2 doors up now has a solar-powered house. And so I think it's time that we get into the business and make sure that our facility is energy efficient and environmentally efficient. I don't know what that means. Again, like Councilmember Wright said, LEED certified or not. I think that there's an advantage to that, not just because of being able to say that you are LEED certified, but it also makes a statement to the community that the city government is not only being sensitive to the environment, but also is encouraging the community to move along those same lines. And I just wonder, when we're that close with 37 points, if there aren't creative ways, such as you suggested with the photovoltaic, that could push us over the top without the big additional costs.
Well, but the answer to your question is yes. I mean, this is sort of a table talk question, because I just want to make sure we understand it. Photovoltaic, knowing
the intensity and use of this facility, I'm going to make a statement. If he wants to disagree with me, he can do that. I don't want anybody to even begin to believe that you can generate enough electricity from this photovoltaic system to make this building just operate off of what you can generate.
No, not at all.
No. And the house up the road from you doesn't do that either. It generates about 16% of the requirements.
Right, and my guess is that would be even less for this facility.
Yeah, because it is a maintenance facility. There are some rather large motor loads.
But the question is, does that give us the extra points that we need to be LEED certified over the 37 cheap ones?
By the same token, I would say that I would rather be, geothermal, more energy efficient units than photovoltaic.
Well,
then you're going to really get something back.
We threw out the photovoltaic concept now. It's certainly, in the manner that we're trying to put it out there, it's a zero budget.
Right.
$0 budget item. Okay, of course, you have to actually land the contract. Okay, so, if it's something that we want to pursue, if there's, no objection to it, then we would contact one of the 2 or 3 corporations who offer these services and see, provide them some information about how much roof area we have available in the correct orientation, and find out whether it's a suitable project for them. So I just want you to know that there are other options out there rather than going out and trying to buy the panels yourself. Yet, you're having that impact on the environment. As many panels as go up, whether you're providing 5 or 50% of your power, every watt that you take off the grid has an impact. So we do recognize that.
But at the same time,
you might be able to get 1 point.
Yeah, but the same question I would have is that if I was going geothermal, am I not now saving electricity?
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm still going back to the fact that a geothermal system, in fact, can save you more electricity than photovoltaic cells on the roof.
I would never recommend to do a photovoltaic array in lieu of a geothermal HVAC system. Photovoltaics are just so
Can I ask this question?
As far as what the impact on the environment is, what the impact on efficiency is.
Right, and might there not be a company interested in obtaining tax credits from a geothermal system, just as the type of thing situation?
It's a very specific issue that there are government credits available to private corporations, which are trying to be used to foster the investment in this technology to push the market along enough that there's enough consumer demand to change the business models and make it more cost effective.
Right. I'm afraid I've drug you down to the weeds. I didn't mean to do that. But I think the point is, can we look for creative ways to get us over the top without having to spend another $70,000 or $80,000 to...
That's what we do. It's the nature of who we are. We're trying to be, we're always trying to be as energy efficient as possible within budget limitations. But I do think we made a fairly honest and straightforward first pass through to come up with the number of points that we think we can get, and then looking at what the other needs are, trying to examine what we can do in the other.
And I think what I tried to say before is that I think we can get this building certified and not even do any of the high cost dollars at all. The reason you would do the high cost dollar items is because those systems actually have the payback that you asked the question to. So yes, this is going to cost me an extra $50,000 or $80,000, but in 10 years, we've made all that money back. So that's almost like a different conversation.
Okay, and I just make one last pitch. This is in Ward 4. I mentioned the photovoltaic system up the road and 2 doors up from Public Works. And of course, down the road on the corner in one of the apartment buildings just installed a geothermal system, or is installing a geothermal system.
And before I go to Councilmember Snipper, the PowerPoint that you just showed us with the breakdown as to the yellow priority, the blue priority, we don't have that, right?
You have it on your itemized breakdown.
But
No pictures.
well, I'm trying to make sure that okay, so it's just second priority building renovation. The fourth group starts the second priority. Everything above that is the first priority?
The one difference is that in talking with the architects, I split out 3 aspects of the administration building. There's a garden engineering wing, a infill section, and redoing the space for lockers. Their direction to me was that that project really had to be connected, all 3 of those pieces. It really wouldn't be practical to try to construct them separately. So you have 2 of those under first priority, which is the locker room, shower, bath, and the new entrance, lobby, and office. And that is tied with the 3rd object, which is garden and engineering building. They function as a unit, as a functional building.
Okay,
and,
so that pulls
need to be combined.
that pulls garden engineering building up into the first priority level.
Right.
And that's the only difference in what you showed us and what we have on this list.
Right.
Okay, that's my understanding.
I thank you very much for this presentation. It was very interesting. I spent a fair amount of time thinking about the following issue, which is basically that we need to renovate the public works facility, and our guess of a particular amount was just that, a complete placeholder. It had no relationship to what any of this stuff costs. So to me, not doing, calling them second priorities or whatever is really nonsensical. The way I think about this is there are some essential things that must be done. It makes no sense not to replace the fuel tanks. We're gonna end up doing that. They're gonna spring a leak and we'll have very toxic stuff spilling into the environment. It makes no sense to call it additional items or second priority. Those kind of things need to be done. I happen to agree with Council Member Siemens that Ritchie Avenue needs to be done for a variety of reasons, not the least of which it is an incredible irritant, will jeopardize the support in the community if we don't do that kind of thing. But I think we need to step back and say, what are the things that must be done that make sense economically to do now rather than later, because the things that we don't do now are going to cost more later. We have a very favorable environment now, both for bond funding and construction costs. If something is going to cost us 15 or 20% because we put it off for a couple years, it's really hard to justify. We could get a bond for that and do it now, have the benefits of it, and it would still cost us less if we did it that way. So I am really not, I urge the council to put aside the placeholder and focus more on what are the minimum things we need to do and what makes sense to do now rather than being hit with it later. We're only going to have to pay for it later. And then I have a question on the truck washing. So if we don't build that little add-on for the truck washing, will we just clean the trucks out in the yard and the stuff will spill out onto the yard? And
Yeah, the way it's currently being done, we have a high-pressure compressor hooked up to a nozzle and soap dispenser in there, get washed right in front of the mechanic shop. The yard at that point is graded, so it heads to the stormwater structure that we renovated, and it has the filtration system that drops out the sediment and the hydrochemicals. And,
so that the small amount of infiltration, because it's not paved, most of
paved.
It is paved.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our whole yard is paved, and the structure itself is within that pavement. We have a stormwater structure that the council authorized, and we recently renovated, I don't know, was it a year ago?
Right.
Not quite. No, we're about 6 or 7 months into that structure. Prior to that, what we did was wash our trucks in the yard,
Okay,
and
that's
it washed
what
down
I
into
am remembering.
Sligo Creek
Yes.
Parkway eventually. Yeah.
That's what I had forgotten. We did that. And then I am very definitely in favor of the geothermal system and similar systems that will essentially have a reasonable payback period. Some of the items, that one to me is almost a no-brainer because you really do get a good return on your investment for that one. And I would urge looking for others that have that. I understand that photovoltaics, for example, are a little harder to justify on that basis. But I wondered if other solar water heating, for example, is that contemplated, or would the geothermal make that less
The preliminary concept that we have is that we would pre-temper or preheat the water with the geothermal system.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
Thanks for that presentation. What's ROW Bay Repair?
Right-of-way, the division is called right-of-way. It's also known as streets and parks.
Okay. And the sanitation parking, it's a lot of money, $695, but that includes a building to put the trucks under, am I right? It's not just the parking lot, it's the whole building.
Yeah, it includes the
That big,
a
long
four-bay place for parking the trucks, and also includes a space for the supervisor's office and the employees to have a locker room area.
Okay. I asked earlier about were the priorities phases at all, and I guess I know it's a good environment, a good fiscal environment to spend money now, so maybe thinking about phasing isn't a good idea, but if there were, but I guess depending on what the bottom line becomes, if there are some things which could as easily be done in a year or two and they help us bear the burden of the costs this year, then we might want to think about that. In the end, after this is built, if we built the whole thing, would we have more capacity to do the work of public works than we do now, or is it a matter of being more comfortable and energy efficient?
Both. We would have storage space that actually accommodates the equipment that we currently have, both in terms of vehicle coverage as well as storage areas for equipment that we currently have sitting out in the open. It improves some of the aspects of the work we do that employees now need to currently do outside of the office or in other places because there is no room within a building to do. We also have, some pretty significant issues with, as I think we've alluded to today, ventilations. We use paints, we use solvents, we use those kind of things. And
so happier workers are willing to work longer hours because they can, because it's warmer or whatever. They're not dying, yeah, right. Okay. I have a couple other things. One is the second to the last item, building, is that maintenance system, measurement and verification? The third to the last, second to the last, $250,000.
You're on the leads.
I'm on the last business here. What is that? Building maintenance system, measurement and verification, $250,000.
I think it's a combination of having a building management system that would be a computerized control system for doing energy management and control, as well as picking up the measurement and verification point on the lead activity. Certainly, measurement and verification is something which is useful. It's not done oftentimes. There is a substantial cost for it, but there's also a rather significant quality assurance aspect to it.
Is this an ongoing activity that
No.
once it's in place, or is it just during the construction period?
Well, there's two aspects there. One is a physical piece of equipment.
There's a computer and a bunch of wires and a software program, and the wires feed out all over the lot, and they test whether something's on or off, or hot or cold, and that kind of thing?
No, there's two, for simplicity, two different types of things have been combined in that number. One is the energy management control system. Okay, just an overall control system for the building.
A souped-up thermostat? Is that what we're talking about?
That's a good way to put it in simple terms, yes.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing is the measurement and verification activity.
This is a human being now.
This is basically human beings, okay, that 8 months after the project is done, you're going back in and you're actually taking measurements, okay, figuring out the efficiencies of the systems, and verifying that they're actually doing what they're designed to do. So there's a labor cost involved. In order to do these measurements, there is a first cost for additional instrumentation and for sensors that wouldn't necessarily be in the project if.
Okay, and are those sensors ongoing sensors? In other words, is that part of operating the structure, or is that just to make sure you tuned it right and got it built the way you hoped to get it built?
I would say that they're not absolutely necessary in that you can operate without them, but of course once they're there, they do provide some value for maintenance and troubleshooting, but the primary purpose of putting them in would be that you could do the measurements to verify that you're actually getting the efficiencies of the various systems.
Sounds like one of the fancy computers you get in a car where you just plug it in, you find out why the red light went on, you know right away, as opposed to having to take apart the distributor and look inside or something like that.
In addition to that, it also gives you the ability, say for instance, there's aspects of this particular building where if a function is going to change, we can change the way the thermostat works via computer electronically. So if we need to be on Saturday and Sunday, we turn it on. If we don't, it's off. So there's aspects of operating the facility that it can then enhance.
I guess the question is it overkill? Because you can get thermostats to do that without spending $250,000. But I'll leave that for now. We don't have to beat it into the ground. I just wanted to know. I wanted basically to know what that $250,000. And the last thing I'll say is that, Reuben, what was your wording on the placeholder? Right? You were talking about the $2 million, right? The $2 million was a placeholder, and the experience that happened in not in this room, but in this building as a whole was, I think that exact point. There wasn't a very good placeholder. The initial placeholder was $3.5–4 million to build a gym, and then we ended up with $16 million with no gym. And that was a fiasco. It was a complete fiasco. So it's one thing to go from a placeholder to an estimate, but if the estimate doesn't hold, we're going to be in trouble. So that's what we have to really, really be careful of. I mean, I think we can sell going from a placeholder to an estimate, but I'll be damned if I'm going to
come back with $5.5 million.
No, if you come back with 4.5 or whatever, and then it actually costs 16, then I will, I think a lot of people will throw a giant fuse at that point. So that's just a little historical context for you.
And if I can just add that I couldn't help but think of, as there was talk about what you were just talking about and the example of the thermostats or whatever, I had to think about the computer controls for the access to this building and how sometimes computer control isn't so good, like on this, I guess it was this weekend where I sometime very recently came in, and of course, all the doors are open because all the doors are locked and I can't get them to unlock, and therefore, the air conditioning or whatever, you're blowing the efficiency of the building because the computer won't let you do what you want to do.
I think that's usually a programming issue.
So it all comes back to the human factor anyway. Councilmember Victoria, did you have questions, observations?
Are we to meet already? It's not even 11. Well, I wanted to go back. The city manager asked us for two things. The elements we definitely do and do not want to see, and a construction guidance on budget. And it seems to me I'd like to reverse the order of that and figure out what we can reasonably spend, and then I could tell you what I definitely did and did not want to see. The $2 million placeholder is, I understand you put it into the budget as a placeholder, but it's also realistically what we have right now. So can we talk about other options? Is it possible? I mean, 2010 has started, correct?
Correct.
And so could this project bridge the 2010 and 2011 budgets and be paid for in 2 years? I mean, what are our options here on realistically getting this money?
And if the city manager could talk about things that wouldn't necessarily have to be divided that way, I'm thinking in terms of bonding.
Yeah, I guess just a general comment, and I certainly have been an advocate for this project, and quite frankly, every time I go over to Public Works, it is mortifying to me as a city manager that we have employees working in those kind of deplorable conditions. I think it's disgraceful, quite frankly. Having said that, I think as we go through these list of items, choices are going to have to be made. And Daryl and I had this discussion about phasing, and the reality is she's going to have to continue to function on the site, so there will probably naturally be some type of construction phasing. Simple breaking it apart into fiscal years, however, doesn't change the fundamental bottom line financially because you still have to pay for it. So from my standpoint, that's a timing issue more so that Daryl and her folks can continue to provide service. From a financial standpoint, it doesn't get you anywhere because you're still going to have to pay the piper because your bond payments or whatever are going to come due. It's a little challenging, I think, to give the council a definitive answer from a financial standpoint because, you know, we just have a preliminary financial report as the next item after we finish this one. So Yvonne Brooks, the Director of Finance, and I have had some similar discussions, and I think anyone who knows Yvonne knows she's very conservative financially, which is why she's so good at her job, and I probably would somewhat echo that. If I were sitting here this evening and having to give the council some guidance about a budget, I would say that you should be looking around the $3 million mark or somewhere thereabouts. Yvonne and I were trying to figure out if, you know, what would be a number that at this juncture, not knowing what the fund balance is going to look like until the audit is done. Considerable uncertainty, I think, about what's going to happen with the city's assessments next year, which is exactly when your debt would have to start getting paid off. I'm not saying that's the magic number, but I would say that would probably be a good figure to start working with as you kind of try to work through this issue, whether this evening or when you come back off of recess. Assuming that we were working with a $3 million budget, what Yvonne and I sort of talked about is what we felt might be available in terms of cash, if that's what the council wanted to do, and where her comfort level in terms of the city's debt burden kind of stopped and started. So we looked at potentially a $3 million financing package that would be based on about $1 million in cash. We were already contemplating using $500,000. I think as we talked through the budget process with the council this year, I think we all recognize that there is some excess fund balance, and I think that becomes a matter of what the council wants to do with that money. What's the best purpose for it to be used? If we took on $2 million in debt, that would bring the city's total debt burden after that issuance to about $6.8 million. That's not unreasonable. That's where we were at one point a few years ago. I think if we were to sit here and look at the $4 million budget that's on this sheet and talk about borrowing $4 million, I'd be picking Yvonne up off the floor. Yeah, I think that's starting to put the city in a debt burden with some of the uncertainty coming down the road that I think understandably would make her very uncomfortable, and I think I would share that. So I'm not sure if that's particularly helpful to the council. I mean, it's not a definitive answer, but it's probably the best that I can give you this evening, is to start maybe looking at this list. Obviously, you know, we'll have a clearer financial picture coming up, but.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. I really thank you for your explanation of kind of where we are financially. I think from my perspective, what I would like to see happen is that we kind of list our priorities, which I have tried to do from my perspective, and that's, you know, I think that ramp on Ritchie Avenue, it's a relatively small item, but it's, I think, very important, and it isn't just because it would make people happy. I think it's unsafe for those large vehicles to be going through this small residential street with a children's park there and also homes along the street that have many children. The neighborhood has changed, but more importantly, the size and the amount of vehicular traffic from Public Works has increased significantly through the years, and it's just no longer a workable situation to have those vehicles traveling down Oswego Avenue. So anyways, that's one item, and then I think the LEED certification is important. I don't have to list the Public Works better than I do, but, I've been there. I've seen the conditions that people are working in, and they need to be better. So I guess what I would like to see is, I would like the staff to come back with, a request for funding that includes those two little things I mentioned, but it's kind of the minimum of what we can do, because I think it's, I voted against doing this year because of the economic conditions. I don't think things have improved dramatically since that time. So I would like to see the estimate be as low as possible, but to do to address the critical needs.
Councilmember Wright.
A couple of things. One is, I wonder, have we explored all the opportunities for outside funds? I think back to, Mary, maybe you can help me remember, was it Bowie?
Yes.
And how much they got quite a bit of funds to do that project, and then that was confirmed by Comptroller when we saw him at the dinner. So I wonder if there's a whole combination of things, like, is there money at the state level around grants, particularly around energy efficiency? Could we go back to Congressman Van Hollen and ask for specific portions of this to be funded? And then have we tapped all the opportunities for stimulus money that's out there about something like this?
Suzanne and I have talked about her contacting Congressman Van Hollen's office, and it's on her to-do list for this week. Truthfully, the past week or so, her focus has been on bringing the auditorium project before the council. My best guess is that we might have a halfway decent shot at perhaps working with Congressman Van Hollen to get some federal funding. Other than state stimulus funds, which Darryl can tell you about her experience trying to work through some very small projects with that. Obviously the rest of the state government in Maryland, if it's not stimulus funding, they're already going back through and cutting departmental budgets again. So my best guess is we can certainly check with some of the stimulus funding for energy efficiency and things of that nature, and truthfully look to the federal government and Congressman Van Hollen's help, and that's certainly something the staff plans to do.
And then the second thing is, if I had my computer here, so I added up some of the numbers. If you took everything above the first priority and added in the gardening and engineering building, you added in the Ritchie Avenue entrance regrading, which I am absolutely supportive of, and can't imagine us doing the project without doing that, because I think we'll have protests, basically, and it would be unfair to the residents, and they would rightfully protest and they'd actually chain themselves to bulldozers, as residents have done in the past in my neighborhood. And then also that we would do the geothermal option, because it's going to pay for itself. If you did all those things, that's $2.7 million basically. So it's under the $3 million that you mentioned. It probably doesn't address all the improvement. Obviously, it doesn't have all the other aspects of the phase 2, but maybe there's other things you put in there to get to $3 million that you feel would be priorities to improve the conditions for some of the workers that aren't improved by what's in that $2.7 million.
And I had a slightly different way of going at it. I didn't have my computer, but I had my pen. And the way I went at it was to find the pieces that I could try and take out of the 3.8 with your prioritization system. So I kept the garden engineering building up in the first part, in the first priority, so that what I was taking out was the other two pieces of that section, which is the right-of-way parts, equipment storage, and office, and the mechanic bay extension. And then I said, okay, which of the additional items could we take out? And it sounded like truck washing we could maybe get by with where we are, given the recent improvements that we made, and the covered storage for materials and the covered parking. But it sounded like we definitely need to move the fuel tanks and the drop-off area I wasn't sure about whether that needed to be part of the admin building, but it's a small amount anyway, so I said, okay, just the truck washing, the covered storage, and the covered parking out in that section, and that dropped it by $754,000. And then I went over to the back page to the green items not included in the estimate necessary for lead certification, and that is back $108,000. So the net on that is only $646,000 below the 3.883, so that leaves us at like 3.2.
I thought Dan was the numbers guy.
I'm glad to defer all over.
So that didn't quite get me to the three. That kind of got me on the other side of the 3 million to where you got on the low side. So it sounds like I would tend to agree with maybe trying to target somewhere in the 3 million range, and I'd love to know the kind of the difference between the, say, the 2.7 whatever it was and the 3.2, kind of how things work in there, what pieces would get us where, and whether you have a sense of that now or whether you'd have to come back with a sense of that, I don't know.
I'm not sure I really understand what you're saying between the difference between 3.2 and...
Well, there was about 500,000 in difference of pieces in there, and
between Josh's
yes,
figures? Okay.
And where in that range you kind of put the right pieces together to say, okay, now we have something that we think works. We know we can't do some stuff. We really do have to include, or we really can exclude. And the biggest piece is the truck washing in terms of getting to, I think, in both pieces. And are we right in assuming that we can get by with truck washing not in that end bay?
Right.
And the other biggest piece is the right-of-way parts, equipment, storage, and office. So, Councilmember Robinson.
Do the fuel tanks need to be removed and replaced?
We've been advised that they're, given the way they were made, and they were installed in 1986, that they should be considered to be nearing the end of their expected life.
Okay.
And then if
We normally would have those in an equipment replacement reserve fund. They're not in our equipment replacement reserve fund currently. So that'll either be an item that we'll add or we'll fund with this.
You would ordinarily have them in an equipment.
Any big ticket item like that should have been flagged for replacement within its
Right.
estimated.
So this is, this is a maintenance item. So it's in here as that. You've been advised that they should be replaced, that they're getting near the end of their useful life. But they're not in a location where they need to be moved in order to do construction. Is that true?
But we're relocating.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been the recommendation that they be relocated. If we extend the mechanic shop base, it makes their current location a little more problematic to access. Whether or not we've identified the ideal location for where they should be, I think there's still some discussion about that. But right now, they're in a little nook between the equipment bay and the mechanics supervisor's office. And if that nook gets made larger, it makes it impossible for vehicles to pass.
Councilmember Victoria.
And can we do the removal and replacement of the fuel tanks without concurrently or after immediately repaving the lot? Is it impractical to do the tanks and not have to repave the lot?
Well, if we had a sense of when we were going to be replacing them, I certainly would not restore that section of pavement that I knew they were going in, because you're just going to be tearing out brand new pavement, so you just leave the old pavement until you put the tank.
No, I think I'm going the other way. Is there going to be a giant crater that we have to do repaving when we remove the tanks?
Well,
but that's not a large part of the overall price of. You're not saying we have to do the $190,000 repaving the entire lot when we do the fuel tanks.
Right. I mean, they include a portion that's the fuel tanks, but the lot is much larger than the fuel tanks.
Okay.
But as we do all of these pieces of construction and tear down a building and reorient and stuff, we're going to be doing paving anyway. And just the construction is going to tear things up as the vehicles drive
Yes,
around and
because
do their
what,
thing.
right, what is in the base price, I guess, is the fact when they go through, they're going to cut the asphalt to do what they need to do, and then they're going to repair, patch the asphalt that you've touched. This larger amount is the whole fact that you're going to go through, and every square inch of the asphalt is going to get milled off and resurfaced.
Yes, kind of like Carroll Avenue and
Yeah,
WSSC.
like
I've heard theories it might be resurfaced.
What else do we need to provide at this point? And can we have a quick sense of kind of ideally where you'd go from here and what time frame that sets up, and whether coming back to us with something or not getting, clear direction tonight, whether that does something like put the design on a time frame such that, oh gee, then you'd be starting in the winter, or, something like that affects things?
Well, I think it certainly
Or is it just to
delays
keep
the-
things going?
It delays the schedule to not have some sense of budget or lead guidance this evening. We need to know that in order to direct the architects to go to the next phase, which is construction drawings. Right now, we still have not determined what we're constructing, so we can't move on to the next phase, which is construction drawings. I think we've fleshed out the design development.
How much more
phase.
specific do you need for lead?
I think we need to have a sense of the ultimate budget and whether or not you want lead certification. And then we
Lead
would-
certification, yes. Ultimate budget, I think the city manager can come back with, the lowest cost to get the mandatory things done. I think,
Yeah, if I can recap what I think I've heard, is that there appears to be a majority of the council that at least would like to get the lowest level of LEED certification. However, that can be, I don't think it's necessarily universal, but there seems to be at least interest in pursuing that. Is that fair, that there's at least?
That's correct.
We want to get, 40 points? We want to get
certified.
That minimum 40 points or whatever it takes to get it certified.
but we don't want you to spend the treasury to do it,
Right. I think, what was your phrase, Councilmember Siemens, the most gain for the lowest investment?
That's right.
There seemed to be considerable interest, that I believe I heard, about geothermal. Seeing some nodding heads. There seemed to be a majority of the council that was in favor of regrading Ritchie Avenue. And then beyond that, what I think I have heard is that there would be deference given to Daryl and her staff in terms of what are the elements of the project that she feels most strongly about.
Right, and with the caveat that you and Yvonne keep her honest.
Daryl's not that hard to keep in line on that front. I think the other part, obviously beyond what we feel financially that the city might be able to bear, at least based on what we know right now, my sense is that the council might be amenable to going above that amount if we are able to work with Congressman Van Hollen or whatever other level of government to try to get as many elements as we can done at this time. Is that a fair?
I think that's right. I think, though, maybe it's stated a little more liberally than I would. I don't think we should be right at at our comfort zone. I think maybe having a little cushion would be nice. So
no,
again, I
agree with
encourage
you.
us to.
Can I suggest some additional guidance language?
Sure.
And let me see if this meets with approval from my colleagues, that our sense is that the overall budget would start with a 2 in the millions place, but beyond that, we're not sure where in that $1 million range it'll fall. So that, that takes us to 2.999, but it starts with a 2. Is that something that seems like a good directive in terms of designing the budget?
I'm okay with it starting in the 3s. Yeah.
Well, I think the city manager gave us a rough read of it, and I'm sure she could refine that number. It might turn out to be 2.9 or 3.2, you know, and she'll have a better sense of exactly what that kind of, as Terry put it, into the comfort zone. I'm very confident that I've known Yvonne and the city manager long enough to know that they're not going to move us very far out of the comfort zone.
And I would support 6 million if you can come up with other resources for funding.
I was thinking 2 from us. Two something from us.
2 to 3 from us.
Right. And the more we can get from somebody else, wonderful.
And I was thinking 3 plus if we needed something extra.
Yeah, I think Ruben and I are a little above.
This sounds like hallway talk.
Councilmember Victoria.
I agree with the priorities Councilmember Wright listed earlier that came in at 2.7 as an initial budget, barring finding any other funding, but because I think we will end up in the low 3s with that.
Yes.
I just wanted to get a nodding of heads and council agreement that we would okay them to go forward with the pop-up with people about photovoltaics at no cost to the city, this tax credit possibilities, everyone, I think, about. So, yes, it's okay to explore that route.
Anyone feeling uncapitalistic tonight?
I just also have to add that our experience with stimulus funding has been just this shy of nightmare, and the added cost that it puts on a project is such that it makes you question the worth of the stimulus funding, the kind of bond performance, purchasing requirements, rigorous detail. They're requiring us to develop a project out of order from the normal range. And we have 2 of those currently going, and we're beyond our ability to manage it in the Public Works Department currently, so we could not take on another stimulus-related project with the current staffing that we have. It is extremely problematic and difficult. I applaud the goals and the efforts, but turning them into reality is very, very difficult.
I hope we can express that to our Congresswoman Holland when Susie talks to them about that, because it's very hard.
If we get a straight grant, I mean, and all you have to deal with is Davis-Bacon, that's a world apart from where we're heading, which is we're going to have a hard time getting vendors to bid on the kind of restrictive contracts that we're going to have to put out.
Yeah, I think the ideal situation would be to talk to Congressman Van Hollen and see if there's any chance of getting EDI funding, which is what we had for the first phase of the community center, what we have for the auditorium renovation. It's just everyone's dream grant in terms of it's very clear what you can do with it. The reporting's very easy. The reimbursement process is easy. I shared with some of the members of the design team, my husband's organization actually tapped tax credits for doing millions and millions of dollars worth of stream restoration, and it's really been a godsend to them. What I will plan to do during the recesses as we get more information is certainly keep the council informed. We'll make sure that we don't get the architects off working on something if we're not confident that the council would be comfortable. Kind of a practical thing in addition to just moving the project generally forward is typically for bonding we have participated in the local government infrastructure program. Assuming they do a fall issuance, we will need to get the number firmed up for very practical purposes in terms of being able to participate in what I hope would be a fall issuance.
And do I recall that if we're not exactly sure of the exact amount, it's better to put in for the highest amount and fall back from it a little rather than going in low and asking for more, and they go, we're not doing that?
Yeah, they pretty much need it doesn't have to be precise. I've been in contact with the state, for some time about this. Obviously, the last thing you want to do is borrow more than you need if you don't have a definitive plan, because you start getting into some arbitrage problems and things like that. But we'll continue kind of plugging through the month of August and see how far we can get. But I may need to talk to you, Mayor, about maybe getting an update on the council agenda, perhaps the first meeting that the council's back from recess, potentially.
Mayor, my recollection is on that bonding that when we asked for a level, that then there was some concern that we would actually go in and lower our request later because they had committed dollars to Tacoma Park that then they could have committed to someone else, so it was a kind of a slap in the face. So you don't want to go in higher than what you want to really accept.
I think the bigger problem is if we were to yank money out is obviously there is, if you're someone who is bidding on the issuance collectively across the state, it's much more attractive the more that someone is buying a larger quantity of bonds. So if we were to give them a high estimate and then pull back, that could hurt everybody in the group.
Right.
So I think that's what Councilmember Seaman is alluding to.
Maybe that's what I meant.
Okay. And just, no, I won't go there. Thank you. We have one final item. That's the city manager's quarterly report and quarterly financial report.
We've already started talking about finances, so it's a great segue. The kind of summary of what's going on in the quarter is just something we typically give you to sort of highlight some things perhaps that we mistakenly haven't told you about, and I guess just sort of recap what the staff's been working on. Certainly if there's questions about any of those items, I'd be happy to answer them. In terms of the financial report, this is obviously very preliminary. The audit is scheduled to be presented to the council on November 23rd. In terms of revenues, when I first got a draft from the staff and I saw the variance of $750,000 from the projections I gave you, I almost showed, quite frankly, then started working through it. One of the things that is very common with many of the city's revenue sources is we make year-end, or what is referred to as kind of period 13 adjustments. Because of the form of accounting that we use, which is what is used by every governmental entity for the most part, for its general fund at least, any monies that come in within 60 days of the end of the fiscal year but were kind of technically earned prior to June 30th essentially gets accrued back. So we have a number of revenue sources, as you probably read through this report: personal property taxes, income taxes, highway user revenues, cable franchise fees, hotel motel taxes. You can go back years in the city's financial records, and there's always year-end adjustments because of that 60-day period. So some of the ones that are showing as low, quite frankly, I'm not concerned about. I think we will be getting receipts in prior to the end of August, and it will bring it in line. Probably the one exception, things that are kind of handled more on a cash basis, is I do believe that the $22,000 shortfall kind of in investment earnings is probably a true shortfall. Truthfully, interest rates have just continued to plummet, unfortunately, throughout the fiscal year. I noted in the memo about the kind of the cost-sharing arrangement we have with WSSC. We had anticipated getting about $220,000 from them, and talking to Daryl last week about this. She's still in active discussions with WSSC in terms of getting that agreement. I think there's a decent chance that that money will come in before the end of August, but truthfully, if it doesn't, it'll just roll to FY 2010. And that doesn't concern me as much as some of the other ones, just because it's an earmarked fund and it's restricted. Bottom line, I think by the time the audit is presented to you, I think we'll be in good shape on the revenue side of the equation. I think we will meet targets one way or the other. There's certainly variances within that.
I'm just going to pick on the personal property tax because Larry Silverman was here. When you say it's a less than the projected amount by a significant margin, at $47,000, do you know what the total personal property taxes are that come into the city's coffers?
I'm kind of going off memory here, Councilmember Robinson. I believe it's I think I'm getting railroad and utilities and personal property. It's under 300,000. It's somewhere between 200 and 300.
Something.
I think we projected right around 250.
Okay, so this is maybe a fifth, but this is a year-end audit adjustment because more may come in. So that's one of those.
Yeah, typically that year-end adjustment has been positive, truthfully, on some of these periods. I think this may have been the one year where it was actually a negative adjustment in period 13.
Okay.
But typically, they're positive adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
At the end under fund balance, at the end of the financial report, I think there's, you say, based on unaudited revenue expenditures, it's anticipated the general fund balance will increase more than anticipated, but the variance cannot be determined at this time. But the magnitude, like, can you even give us a range of how much you think the fund balance will go up?
And I would probably just note that this report obviously, rather than what we have done for the prior three quarters, really focuses on the projections we gave you during the budget process. So I think a lot of that, it's very difficult. If I had to take my best guess on the revenue side, Councilmember Wright, I think we'll probably come in at what I projected or possibly slightly higher. Like I said, I think the big question mark is the WSSC monies, which do get accounted for during the year. The biggest problem, truthfully, is on the expenditure side. And we have, across all funds, I won't bore you with the accounting, but we have about $300,000 in open purchase orders, which are basically what we ask staff to put in just to make the accounting easier. In some cases, I think I flagged this, if I were to look at building electric costs, they look really low compared to what Daryl had projected, but there's a purchase order out there because there's a bill that still hasn't come in. So that $300,000 swing is obviously fairly significant. I think I feel comfortable in saying we'll at least be at the projection we gave you for fund balance. In terms of how much more, I think that's really difficult to say. I don't think it'll be a huge number, but it's very difficult when we have these outstanding revenues and these outstanding purchase orders. To give you an example, on income taxes, it has not been uncommon in the years I've been here sometimes to get a year-end audit adjustment on income taxes that's, $300,000. It's, sometimes been, lower, and it's about 105. So you can have several $100,000 of swing just on something that we're not going to know until the money gets remitted to us. So I apologize, I can't give you a better answer. I think that's one of the things that will become a lot clearer as the month of August kind of moves on in terms of looking at where we'll end up in fund balance and being able to provide better guidance on the public works facility.
And then just one last question, and then I'll go home for the night. I just wanted to check, because we've had the first month of the fiscal year, and we committed to buying 100% wind power. So I wanted to make sure that we're on track to do that in the first month.
Daryl has been in touch. I mean, it's all worked through the contracts through Montgomery County. I will get an update from her and send you all an email this week. I know she's been in close contact with them in terms of how those contracts were working, what the opportunities were.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Go ahead and say it, please.
We're adjourned until September 8th.